US President Joe Biden is in Warsaw, where he's held his first meeting with Ukrainian officials since the war began. Following talks with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, he's set to deliver a speech urging the free world to rally to Ukraine's cause. I'm Pablo Folielias. Welcome to the programme. After a month of fighting that's left thousands dead and sent millions on the run, Moscow says it's shifting its focus to Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. While the Kremlin claims it successfully completed the first phase of what it calls its military operation, analysts say it could be a sign that Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to save face after failing to subdue Ukraine or capture its capital, Kyiv. But as Moscow changes focus, the human tragedy of the invasion shows no sign of abating.
Signs of spring greeted Kyiv on Saturday as Ukraine shakes off its winter and enters a new phase of war. There may be a change in strategy after Russian defeats, but there's little respite for those on the front lines of battle. Many are visibly exhausted but steadfast in their determination to stay. Putin came, as you can see, he says. Our children and grandchildren are dying. I'm 62. I can't leave this place. I'll stay here. If need be, I will die here. But I will not give them Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have recaptured areas on the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv. Still, lives continue to be destroyed. At this hospital in Kharkiv, the wounded continue to arrive as Ukrainian forces come under heavy fire. In Mariupol, the damage inflicted by Russian bombs is clear. Unfortunately, nothing remains of Mariupol, and they're bombing it with savage weapons. This last week there have been explosions like I've never heard before. They hit residential areas with rockets. Hundreds continue to flee Mariupol, saying goodbye to their decimated city and to those who must stay behind.
Well, let's bring in DW correspondent Nick Conley, who's in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Hi, Nick. Good to see you. Now, despite the fact that Russia has said it will focus on the eastern Donbass region, we understand that war is still raging in the south, in the cities of Mariupol and Kherson. Can you give us more on that?
I think there are very few people here in Ukraine who would take that announcement at face value. I think this is more about trying to make lesser demands, make a more manageable goal to then sell to the Russian public as a success, given what is arguably a fiasco in the rest of the country and Russia's failure to make significant progress in recent weeks. Going into this, you had messages from Moscow about being able to take Kiev in a matter of days rather than weeks, and that obviously hasn't happened. Indeed, there is a lot of fighting beyond Donbass, not just around me here in Kiev, 25 kilometers down the road in Irpin. The fighting continues, although it seems like the Ukrainians have been able to push back Russian forces quite significantly in some places near Kiev. In the south, around Mykolaiv and Kherson, is some news coming in today that even the Ukrainians were able to return to Kherson, which had been the one major Ukrainian city under full Russian control so far. So pretty difficult to really judge those carefully because there aren't many journalists, independent journalists on the ground, but a sense that this is a war that is very much going on, and this is by no means the beginning of the end.
Nick, you've touched on it there, but does Russia's new focus on eastern Ukraine mean that the capital is off the hook? Do you think that Russian troops might fall back?
Well, we've seen that Ukrainian success east of the river, that supposedly Russian troops have been pushed back by quite some way. But on the other hand, just 20 kilometers direct line from where I'm standing now in downtown Kiev. They are still there, and we hear the shooting, we hear the artillery, some very big bangs this morning, quite close. I think that was Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems knocking some projectiles out of the sky. So this is very much still going on. Yes, people are getting used to it. There are kind of new routines. People are coming out in greater numbers, but it doesn't mean the danger isn't still there. We're having routine reports of residential buildings being hit, people being hurt. This is still going on, and the shooting and the artillery continues.
Well, another issue is what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky makes of Russia's shift in focus now. Today he addressed representatives from countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia at the Doha Forum. Let's have a listen.
This is also a question of abandoning the usage of Russian oil and gas. Responsible states, like the state of Qatar, are reliable and solid exporters of energy resources, and they can make their contribution to the stabilization in Europe. They can do much to restore justice. The future of Europe rests with your efforts. It depends on your efforts. I ask you to increase the output of energy to ensure that everyone in Russia understands that no country can use energy as a weapon and to blackmail the world.
Well, it appears like an attempt by President Zelensky to speed up the West's move away from Russian gas and oil. Nick, is that the case?
Definitely, and people here will tell you that since the beginning of the war in late February, a month ago, Europe alone has transferred about 20 billion euros to Russia for coal, for oil and gas. At the same time, Ukraine has received just about 4 to 5 billion. So you can see in terms of the kind of order of scale there, Russia getting a lot of money to pay for this military campaign. And obviously that is a priority here now in Ukraine. They say that the sanctions on Russian banks and other Russian businesses is all well and good, but it's not enough. And to force the Kremlin to really stop this campaign, the only thing that will help now is an embargo and an immediate end to those transfers of huge amounts of hard currency.
Well, on the other hand, Russia has barely budged on its demands on Ukraine, including that Kyiv recognise the self-proclaimed republics in Donetsk and Luhansk. Is that a red line Zelensky is willing to cross, Nick?
I think for now it's a definite no. He's talked about maybe being open to some kind of deal over NATO membership. That's been an aspiration in Ukraine for some years now. That could be up on the table, but accepting the independence of those self-proclaimed republics, I think that is a no-go. Ukraine feeling that it is doing well and that success on the battlefield is being recognized by Western partners doesn't feel like it needs to make that kind of painful concession right now, and it's pretty hard to see why the Ukrainian public would agree to that kind of thing, would accept that kind of deal after so many deaths and so much suffering across the country in a situation where, unlike 2014, this country hasn't collapsed militarily and is still going in spite of a month of war.
DW correspondent Nick Connolly, thank you and take care. Well, I'm joined now by Raphael Loss from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Hi, Raphael. Good to have you here on DW. Now, the Russian military is now saying that phase one of the invasion is, quote, mostly complete, and it'll now focus its war on the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. Do you buy that, or has the shift been announced because of the failure to take the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv?
I think from what we can tell, Russian armed forces are definitely overstretched. Their supply lines are buckling under Ukrainian pressure. There is some danger of Russian troops being encircled by Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian armed forces have been able to mount limited counteroffensives in some areas. What I would caution of is from the statements that we've heard out of Moscow in the last couple of hours to assess that anything changes in Vladimir Putin's strategic goals. I think what we see is an operational reorganization to limit the exposure of Russian armed forces and to reprioritize goals as part of this campaign. But again, if they take the Donbass, there's nothing that would prevent them from returning to Kiev.
Raphael, how do you assess the change in strategy against the backdrop of domestic support in Russia for the invasion?
It's difficult to assess. One, we must recognize that the Kremlin has a tight grip on the Russian media ecosystem. It has consolidated authoritarian rule over the past couple of weeks, as well as the campaign against Ukraine has commenced. And that is a long-standing trend that Vladimir Putin has facilitated over the past 20 years since he's come to power in 2000. So I find it difficult to, one, rely on sort of public opinion polls that are coming out of Russia there. We need to recognize that often people are exposed to just one side of the story. But we also have to see that especially a lot of young people who have experience abroad are leaving Russia, and that the Russian economy in the long term is under a lot of pressure, particularly emerging technologies, startups, and so on and so forth, are relocating to outside of Russia.
Let's talk a little bit about President Putin. Could this be a potential face-saving move by him?
I think in the short term it might be, but as I said earlier, I think it would be wrong to assess that Vladimir Putin has moderated his goals vis-a-vis Ukraine. I think his rhetoric towards Ukraine as a nation, as a country, as a people, has been fairly consistent over the past couple of years. He's negated that there is such a thing as a Ukrainian identity that is separate from a Russian identity. And so I think we need to recognize and prepare for a sort of longer-term pressure campaign against Ukraine and a longer-term pressure campaign against the West who's supporting Ukraine.
Now, US President Joe Biden is in Poland. Is he succeeding in keeping the NATO countries united?
I think he is, but that is something that is on the shoulders of the European NATO allies as well, and Canada too, I think. What we've seen over the past couple of days in various Brussels meetings, from the G7 to the EU Council meeting to the NATO Council meeting, is a very unified West. There are some differences, I think, when it comes, for example, to energy sanctions. Germany is very reluctant there. Some other Eastern allies and the United States have been putting some pressure on Berlin on this issue. But nevertheless, I think overall the picture that emerged from Brussels and that is now being re-emphasized in Poland by Biden and his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, is one of unity. That is somewhat unexpected because, if you recall, the American presidential election 2 years ago, then Poland was very much hoping for Donald Trump to return to the White House. And there was some disappointment when Joe Biden criticized Poland and Hungary together with Belarus for sort of creeping authoritarianism. But I think the current crisis has led to a rally around the flag effect within NATO, within the EU, in a fairly united West.
Raphael Loss from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, we have some breaking news coming in. There are reports of 3 loud explosions in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. A local city official described the blasts as powerful and called on people to remain calm and stay in their homes. We'll have more on that developing story in our ongoing coverage of the war in Ukraine. Moving on, let's take a look at some other developments in the war. French President Emmanuel Macron has proposed an international mission to evacuate people from Mariupol, the Ukrainian city devastated by Russian attacks. Macron said he was working on a humanitarian operation together with Turkey and Greece, and he would soon call Russian President Vladimir Putin to work out the details. Crowds unfurled a giant Ukrainian flag and shouted "Go home" at a rally in Slavuch after Russian forces entered the city and seized a hospital in the town. Russian forces responded by firing into the air and deploying stun grenades to disperse the crowd. Well, on his second day in Poland, US President Joe Biden is to deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The White House says the president will call on the free world to stand against Vladimir Putin. President Biden is in Warsaw for talks with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda. The two are set to discuss the situation in Ukraine with the West's military, humanitarian and economic response to the war on the agenda. Earlier, Biden also met with the Ukrainian foreign minister and defense minister in his first face-to-face talks with top Ukrainian officials since the war began. Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Barbara Wiesel, who's outside the presidential palace in Warsaw. Hi, Barbara, good to see you. Now, President Biden is meeting with the Polish president. What can we expect from it?
Of course, we can expect that some of the things he talked about with the Ukrainian ministers, particularly the request for more and stronger and further-reaching weapons, will be also on the table here behind me. But if we take a little look around here, we can see that this visit of Joe Biden here in Warsaw is quite the sensation for local people. Many of them have come out to sort of watch the president walk into the presidential palace here, and of course they saw his whole security machinery and the beast, the famous presidential limousine, which is now parked out of view, of course. And the two presidents are inside there, and after having sort of pushed to the side a bit of the political and diplomatic rubble that's in the past of those two presidents, because Andrzej Duda took his good time after recognizing the election victory of Joe Biden last time. They will really have to sort of come to the point, what more can the international community do in order to strengthen Ukrainian resistance against the invasion of Russia, and what more can they do also to sort of keep Ukraine strong and alive on the other side of the border, which is not that far from here, actually. So that is really the main point, and Poland is the leader in sort of pushing for stronger sanctions, for more measures against Russia.
Well, that actually brings me on to my next question. What exactly are they calling for if they want a tougher stance against Russia?
They've published a 10-point plan, and some parts of it are quite simple. For instance, prevent any Russian trade going through Belarus to the European Union, which is still taking place, and just close those borders. Cut off oil and gas immediately. Don't wait for another few months or till the end of the year. Do it right now, because it's important to sort of hurt Russia economically right now. And sort of a string of other measures similar to that, really sort of on the economic side. Of course, a call for better and more weapons, a call for fighter jets for Ukraine in order to defend themselves against the Russians in the airspace. And finally, of course, it is the ongoing call of Poland to send in a humanitarian mission under international and NATO protection to evacuate the embattled regions, particularly in the southeast or areas like Mariupol, where civilians are really under siege conditions, and Poland says we can't look on, we really have to do something against it now, not in 3 months or in a half year.
Now, Joe Biden is set to deliver a speech as well, Barbara. What can we expect to hear from the US president?
Yeah, this is announced to be a sort of a speech that will set the ground for the further relations, of course, within NATO, for unity within the Western community. And he will also call, of course, for unity in standing up against what the United States call the battle between democracies and autocratic forces. And they see this as sort of a very basic and very as a matter of principle, really. They say we have to stand up to this, otherwise we will be weakened. This is a fight that is fought in Ukraine, that it concerns all of us, that really delineates the two sides here in the world, and it's like good and evil, black and white. It seems to be very strong in that regard from the little that we heard beforehand. So he's really wanting to set the ground for the next months and for the future of NATO and European Union and transatlantic relations, of course.
DW correspondent Barbara Wiesel in Warsaw, thank you. Well, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And with me here in studio is DW reporter William Glucroft. Good to see you, William. Hey, now, this visit is a delicate balancing act, we'll say, for Biden. It's no secret that relations between the US and Poland have been not the smoothest. So tell us a little bit more.
That's right. I mean, it's definitely not a black and white situation, because Poland is both this golden child right now of NATO, of the West, of its solidarity, being so geographically and strategically important to Ukraine. And it's the black sheep of the West, because Biden himself has pointed out that Poland is in some ways slipping into authoritarianism with this very conservative government, a government that was more aligned with Trump's view of the world. When Biden was elected president, it took a while for people like Duda to acknowledge that, to congratulate Biden's win. So there might be some bad blood there. And there's a number of very real political differences, both as far as the United States sees things and the European Union, which Poland is a member state of, such as, very strict restrictions against abortion, very, very difficult for LGBTQ plus community. There's been an almost elimination of an independent judiciary in Poland, which is a cornerstone of any democratic, truly democratic country. And that's what the EU has had so many problems with Poland about. So while we're seeing these two parallel and contrasting situations where Poland is being held up as so important for NATO and Western solidarity, but at the same time, EU officials and Biden administration officials are cautioning not to forget all these other darker things, all these other more critical aspects of Poland, not to let that slip away and hold them to account.
Right, well, moving on a little bit to this unprecedented show of unity that we've seen among Western allies, and that's resulted as well in some pretty big shifts in policy. We don't need to look too far. Germany, of course, being one of those countries. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we are definitely in a new Germany. We've already seen this massive shift on defense spending, which, after decades of Germany shying away from hard power, from military power, will soon have, if the Bundestag approves it, will soon have the largest military budget in Europe after for so many years dragging its feet on military spending, getting criticized for not spending enough, for not modernizing its forces. It's about to get a lot of money, the $100 billion that we've been hearing about. Of course, there's also the energy issue. The United States has the gas and oil embargo on Russia. It's much easier for the United States to do that. German officials will always tell you, yeah, easy for the U.S. to do that. Russia is literally next door to us. It's right here. It is a neighbor. It is not going away, good or bad. We have to deal with it in a way that the United States can be more distanced from. And we see that in terms of energy independence, with the EU and Germany in particular so much more heavily reliant on Russian gas, specifically, also oil and coal to a slightly less amount. And we've heard very honest assessments coming from, for example, Robert Habeck in the German government saying, we're just not going to be able to get off it that quickly, and an embargo is just not a realistic option right now.
DW reporter William Glucroft, thanks for your analysis. Well, many of those who flee Ukraine often arrive traumatized in neighbouring countries. The war itself, the sudden need to leave everything behind, and the journey out, as well as the uncertainty of what might come next, can be overwhelming. DW's Monika Szyratska sent us this report from the train station in Przemyśl on the Polish border with Ukraine. There she met Ewa Budna. She's a Polish psychotherapist who's worked in Germany for decades, just one of several German and Polish mental health professionals offering new arrivals psychological first aid.
Eine 25-jährige junge Frau.
A Saudi-led coalition has launched overnight airstrikes on the Yemeni capital Sana'a and the Red Sea city of Hodeidah, killing at least 7 people. The attack came a day after Iranian-backed Houthi rebels staged a daring attack on an oil depot in the Saudi city of Jeddah ahead of today's Formula One race in the kingdom. A volcano has erupted near a scenic lake in the Philippines. Authorities raised the alert level in the region and urged residents to evacuate. There have been volcanic earthquakes and concerns that further eruptions may occur. Experts are warning of possible fast-moving gas and a tsunami in the lake. Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of celebrated rock band Foo Fighters, has died while on tour with the band in Colombia. The 50-year-old joined the group, formed by ex-Nirvana musician Dave Grohl, in 1997. In a statement, the band called his death a tragic and untimely loss. While you're watching DW News, here's a recap of our main stories. In an apparent strategic shift in the face of stiff Ukrainian resistance, Moscow says it will now focus on the eastern Donbas region of Ukraine. Russia claims the first stage of its war in Ukraine is over and that it's been a success. On his second day in Poland, US President Joe Biden has met face-to-face with Ukrainian officials. Later, he'll deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The president will call on the free world to stand against Vladimir Putin. Well, that's all from me for now. Up next is the war in Ukraine rewriting global trade alliances. That's on DW Business in just a moment, and stay tuned for that. And don't forget, you can keep up to date on our website, dw.com, and you can follow us on our social media accounts. I'm Pablo Foley-Elias. Claire Richardson will be here with more headlines for you at the top of the hour. So for me, take care and see you soon.
I've covered more than 80 elections for the ABC over the last 3 decades.
Doesn't get better than Anthony Green, one of my favourite colleagues.
Anthony Green is extraordinary. I've never seen anyone like him.
He is absolutely unbelievable.
His capacity to understand numbers as they're coming in and explain them.
All of the politicians, from Prime Minister to Opposition Leader, waits for Anthony Green to call it. And an amazing asset to our election coverage.
And I'm quite happy to continue to do it for a few more years yet.
What is the effect of telling and hearing diverse stories?
The mood, obviously, of Ukrainians has been changing kind of dramatically.
The world needs to act now.
Houses and locations that have never flooded before are flooding.
Get a different perspective.
Look at this panel. This is a dream come true, this panel.
On the stories of the day.
I found the last 10 minutes of this show pretty extraordinary.
Just stand there and do that. It all counts.
The Drum, weeknights on ABC TV and ABC iView.
The worst possible place for human beings to live in the face of climate change would be Australia.
Future forecast.
It's just far worse than we all expect it's going to be.
Collectively, we have not done enough.
Question is, how bad are we willing to let it get?
The human impact of our climate in crisis.
I'm incredibly angry that so many people died.
The world has to understand that this is a make or break moment.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView. Australia's roadmap to recovery. What the make or break budget means for the government, the country and for you. From 7:30, the Treasurer's speech, then all the interviews and expert analysis in the ABC News Budget Special. Budget Night 2022, Tuesday, ABC TV, iView, radio and online.
Louis Theroux returns.
Why do you have that? My fans are famous, the rappers. They gotta be protected at all times.
To explore the most controversial corners of America.
I consented to something, and then something else happened that was without my consent. I don't know why that's hard to understand.
We're live here, guys. Say hello.
I actually enjoy racist humor and misogyny. I think that's awesome. I think we need more racist jokes.
Forbidden America. Stream now on ABC iView or Sunday 8:30 on TV+.
Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma.
About things that haven't happened yet.
What if you could live to 150? Would the world be better without lies?
No.
If you had a deep fake video of you...
Are we going to the tape?
Well, if there are thousands of gods, how do you know you've chosen the right one?
You would answer that in a light entertainment format.
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
What's empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs. Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Economic growth family had never lost a live performance.
Welcome to Focus on Europe. Now, in Germany's capital, Berlin, and around the world, people have been taking to the streets to demonstrate their outrage over Russia's ongoing assault on the people of Ukraine. At the Brandenburg Gate, a Sound of Peace event appealed for an end to the bloodshed. Over 12 million euros in donations were collected for the victims of the war. Meanwhile, moving video messages, this time from Christina, at the heart of the suffering and uncertainty. She fears her country could literally be wiped off the map. Like millions of other young men and women from this once flourishing
partner, the war took them and so many others by surprise.
I don't heard the bomb attack. It starts in 5 of the morning, and after 1 hour, my dad called me, and I feel like, oh my God, why my dad called me? Maybe war starts, ha ha ha, and really war starts. And
Christina and her partner fled, taking the train to Lviv. They left their home and their relatives behind in Kharkiv, along with all their plans and dreams laid waste by Putin's war. A young marketing expert, Christina is not only worried about her own future, but about the future of her country.
I just afraid that when it will be over, there will be no Ukraine on world map. That's my biggest fear. I hope that we will rebuild our country because I love it very, very much.
After arriving in Lviv, she tried to focus on the positive.
It was the most happiest moment of this week. I have a normal food and wash my hair, and it's kind of fantastic. And in Kharkiv, you can do this.
But the happiness was short-lived. Christina soon began to feel guilty and blamed herself for leaving her family in Kharkiv.
I hate myself because I can't take a shower. I hate myself because we have a Wi-Fi. I hate myself because they in Kharkiv and I'm unsafe.
An acquaintance sent Christina photos of people in Kharkiv trying to keep themselves supplied with the bare necessities. Christina has been in constant contact with her family and friends.
They asked them to leave Kharkiv, and they're thinking about it all night. And in the morning, she said that they will stay there. And
Yuri Halub is in Kharkiv. We first made contact with him just after the war started. He's an avid soccer fan. Whether Munich or Amsterdam, hardly any stadium was too far for him and his wife Victoria during peacetime. But then, they became trapped in an air raid shelter in his hometown.
They're not only hitting military targets here, but regular apartment buildings as well. We can't even go out to get a breath of fresh air.
He and his wife stayed in this cellar in central Kharkiv, together with their neighbors and their dogs and cats.
We're hoping our partners will help us to stop these idiots, these enemies.
Here, Kharkiv has been under siege. Many civilians were said to have been killed during the previous night.
We stay in the bomb shelter because so many saboteurs are at work, laying booby traps and killing people in the streets.
Yuri went out every day to try to scrape together food for his family and others in the building. Fuel has also been in short supply in Kharkiv.
The city is very big, and people need fuel for their cars to get to the supermarkets that are open. People wait in their cars for hours to get some, but that's necessary for survival here.
Yuri is a retail buyer for supermarkets. He showed us the empty shelves, saying there was hardly any bread left, nor fish, milk, semolina, or barley. A pallet of fresh eggs went in minutes. 3 days earlier, an apartment complex had been hit. In this city alone, the death toll climbed to over 150. Before the war, Kharkiv had a population of 1.5 million. Nobody knows how many remain.
We've just driven to a spring to pick up water for the residents of our building. They can't go out. Shots are being fired right now, but not here in this district.
Yuri was trying to get his wife and relatives out of the city. The danger was too great for them to stay. At last, it looked like he'd found a way.
We're at the train station, trying to evacuate our families. We're standing by the train, hoping everything will work out all right.
His wife Victoria set out for the Polish border without him.
We're at the station. On the whole, everything's fine. We're alive.
We were later informed that his wife had made it. Yuri stayed on in Kharkiv to help. Over 500 kilometers further south, in Kherson, Katerina is also taking shelter.
Maybe today it's my last interview, last talk. All the time write to my boyfriend that I love him, because I didn't know which message can be lost.
Katerina's boyfriend, Anders, is from Denmark. They have been in a long-distance relationship for 2 years. Now she is in a war zone, and he's over 2,000 kilometers away.
It's really still hell, because we cannot stop thinking about what is going on in Ukraine, what is going on with my girlfriend.
Just a few months ago, they celebrated Christmas together. They began the new year with mutual plans.
In March, we planned move together, but late. Not in a time, not right timing.
The last time they saw each other was in late January. When they said goodbye, Anders had had a bad feeling, as if he'd sensed hard times lay ahead.
I remember this conflict being more and more present in the news, and I was like, maybe a mistake to let her go home at this point.
He wishes he had been wrong, but Anders' feeling has proven all too true.
The evening before, she had to talk to her parents that they were starting to get worried, and they wanted her to leave as fast as possible. So we had decided to book plane tickets for 6 March. But then the following morning, she woke me with a message, a picture of one of these clouds from an explosion, and said that it has begun.
Katerina's family has a small shop. During the first days of the war, they kept their neighbors supplied with groceries. But as the Russian forces moved closer, even that got to be too dangerous.
If they're hungry, we didn't want to say shoot us or come and take out all food what we have. Then we just hide.
Kherson was the first major Ukrainian city to be occupied by Russian forces. Some residents are still venturing out into the streets to protest against the war, but not Katerina. She's afraid to leave her building. The family still has enough provisions. They only go out to board up the doors and windows.
We have prison in our own city. We have prison in our own houses. We have prison and powerless. Right now, it's our shell where we sleep. You can see place for mom, little more down for me, and from the side for the father.
Every moment, I'm scared that something will happen to her. I try not to show this too much to her.
I can go to my boyfriend and stay there, because otherwise I will be broken to the end. You just try to survive. I wanna be safe and love. That's my plan.
And that's their only plan, until they meet again.
Well, in Russia itself, the propaganda war is in full swing as tens of thousands join a rally to mark the invasion of Ukraine. The message is the Russian people are standing by their leader. Outside Russia, only very few countries have given visible backing to Putin. One is Serbia. Belgrade traditionally has close ties with Russia, and many Serbs see the Russians as their brothers. So some are not protesting against the invasion, but demonstrating fierce support for it.
These Serbian nationalists are staging a pro-Russian car rally in Belgrade. They're on Russian President Vladimir Putin's side.
We're here because of Russia. Fight Nazism. Nazism was not exterminated in 1945. It has survived and must be destroyed.
They're convinced that Putin is doing just that, fighting Nazism in Ukraine. The letter Z adorns many cars here, the same as can be found on Russian army vehicles. It stands for the phrase, for victory. Like most Serbians, Nebojša Radulović rejects these nationalists and the war. Even so, he feels a strong connection to Russia and has long perceived NATO as a threat. He was a teenager when his native Belgrade was bombed during the Kosovo War.
I was 14 and in 8th grade, but instead of figuring out which high school to go to, we were preoccupied with trying to survive the bombings.
To this day, there are still ruins in central Belgrade, a grim reminder of the war. Radulović says the bombings destroyed more than bridges and residential buildings. They also undermined his trust in the West and its values. And he says many here feel similarly. Russia's influence in Serbia, meanwhile, grew stronger over the years. Putin is currently on almost every front page. Many Serbians view Russians as their Slavic brothers. Russia is admired, and few criticize its war against Ukraine.
I think this war has been inevitable for a long time. The West is hypocritical, especially Western media that report on it. We are the largest Balkan nation. We should feel the greatest responsibility. But we have not learned from our history. That's awful.
One group with a long history of fighting for civil and human rights are the women in black. But few join their protest against the war in Ukraine. The activists said the low turnout was sobering. They believe it was linked to the fact that many Serbians long for a strong leader rather than a true democracy.
Do Serbians like Russia or Putin? What they like are authoritarian governments. That has nothing to do with Russia per se.
Not long ago, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock visited Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. The meeting was tense, as Vučić is known for his close ties to Putin. Since the war broke out, Vučić has attempted a political balancing act, approving a UN resolution condemning the Russian invasion, yet refusing to carry Western sanctions against the country.
What are we supposed to distance ourselves from? In what sense are we connected to the conflict in Ukraine? What did Serbia do wrong? Serbia is not talking about anyone, not bringing up any names. There is no love or hate. When it comes to us, we only respect international law.
President Vučić is currently campaigning to be re-elected in April, and polls suggest he and his party are set to win. Most Serbians share his view on the Ukraine war. In Tašmajdan Park in central Belgrade, this monument commemorates the children killed during NATO attacks on the city. Memories of that old war are still alive.
Serbia, Russia, we are not in this war, but the US, England, France, they need to recognize how it came to this.
I'm against every war. I was against the Kosovo War and against the one before that. I'm against interventions and oppose using force against independent states.
But Nebojša Radulović and his friends say the Ukraine war has pushed them to reassess their long-held loyalty to Russia and critical opinion of NATO in the West. They feel isolated and wonder where that leaves them and their country, Serbia.
We've always been caught in the middle, and that's where we are again now. I'm not sure what difficulties we would encounter if we were to go along with sanctions against Russia. We just cannot take that road right now. Our ties with Russia are too strong, economically speaking, and there's also an element of fear.
Their biggest hope is that the war in Ukraine will end soon.
And that hope is shared by many Russians. Tens of thousands have already left their homeland since the conflict began. And indeed, émigré Russians have often sought refuge in Paris in the upheaval that followed the Russian Revolution in 1917 and in Soviet times. And in recent weeks, many have expressed their dismay over the war. Among the most outspoken is Galia Ackerman. She's investigated issues like electoral fraud and politically motivated violence. Now she's focusing on developments in Russia itself. Her goal, to oust Putin from power, her weapon, information.
The Ukrainian national anthem at the Place de la République in the center of Paris. Galia Ackerman is showing her solidarity. She was born in Russia but has lived in exile in France for more than 30 years. She is popular among Ukrainians because they know she has been warning about Putin for a very long time, since long before the war.
This is exactly the new attempt to stifle, not only to liquidate Ukrainians, but also to extinguish the Ukrainian culture.
Ackerman began her political activism from her Paris exile. Last year, she founded Desk Rossi, an online publication by well-known Russian exiles and Russia experts. Their articles describe how Putin has grown increasingly authoritarian over the years, how he has extended his influence, and how he's toyed with his foreign counterparts.
For years, both in France and in Germany, there has been a strong pro-Russian sentiment. There have been many real agents of influence and many people who have simply acted in good faith, who have believed or wanted to believe that Russia would be a good partner. But all their well-meaning words have made us slow to recognize the extreme danger represented by the Russian regime.
Desk Rossi has attracted a large audience. Up to 150,000 readers click on the analyses and opinion pieces, some of them in Russia. The fact that the Ukraine invasion is turning out differently than Putin imagined gives Ackerman hope.
I think he might even be overthrown because he has been a great military failure.
The Parisian Russian exiles are using the power of words to lend support. At an event in a Paris theater, they read letters by imprisoned Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny about Putin and the oligarch Roman Abramovich, owner of the British football club Chelsea.
On board a very expensive plane, Putin's wallet, Abramovich, is flying to a NATO country. What audacity! And everyone's happy. Putin and Abramovich steal money from the budget and invest it in the West.
Behind the camera is Gennady Vista, who comes from Ukraine.
I am delighted with Galia's commitment to her fight against Putin. It's very, very near to my heart.
Galia Ackerman fled the communist dictatorship of the Soviet Union for Paris. She had hoped for a different future for Russia, but Putin has returned her former homeland to a dictatorship, she says, while Ukraine has experienced a different development.
I am Ukrainian by adoption. I have always felt morally and intellectually more at home there than in Russia, and especially in Putin's Russia.
Ackerman and Desk Rossi are determined to work even harder and to be a voice of the Russian opposition and of Ukrainians in this war.
To Hungary now, where this giant TV truck is crisscrossing the country. It's election time, and a group called Partizan wants to make sure that there is at least some plurality and diversity in the political discourse. For the first time in over a decade, an opposition coalition could challenge authoritarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban for power, but Orban is omnipresent. After all, he has a stranglehold on state media, and here too, Putin's war is top of the agenda.
The mobile TV studio Partizan hits the road. Today, they are heading north to the small town of Tiszavýváros. After setting up, filmmaker and activist Marton Gurias is ready to receive his first guests. His goal is to inform as many as possible about the elections.
We are doing this show, especially in the countryside, because we are mostly located in Budapest, in the capital, to have more access to people who are living in more rural areas of the country.
In rural Hungary, most people vote for the ruling Fidesz party. and most watch pro-government TV channels. Marton Gulyas's YouTube channel is financed through private donations. He produces critical content, also because he says earnest political debate is lacking in Hungary's mediascape.
Just you have to imagine that today, on this particular day, this was the first time in 4 years' time when the opposition candidate of Prime Minister had 5 minutes on air.
But over the past weeks, both Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his challenger Péter Márki-Zay have adjusted their campaign focus to reflect Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Márki-Zay is criticizing the pro-Russia position Orbán took for years.
Orbán is the one who supported Putin. State media is spreading pro-Russia propaganda still. Although Orbán also approved European banning of Russia Today and Sputnik News, but here our state media and private Fidesz media is still supporting Putin and condemning Ukraine.
We would have liked to put this criticism to Orbán's Fidesz party. But despite numerous requests, we received no response from party headquarters in Budapest. On National Day in mid-March, hundreds of thousands came from across Hungary. Here, too, Putin's war was in the forefront of people's minds as they waited to see Orbán. We don't think this war just happened. There's a background to it. Everything has led up to this.
The world, and especially the Western media, have double standards. You can understand the Ukrainians, but you also have to understand the Russians.
No one is really talking about the fact that it was actually America that ignited this fire, and that they did it on purpose.
Then Viktor Orbán made his appearance. Like most independent media, we were given a seat far away from the podium. The head of state was barely visible to the naked eye, but his rhetoric about Hungary's role in the Ukraine war came across all the more sharply.
Russia has Russian interests. Ukraine is looking after Ukrainian interests. Neither the US nor Brussels will think with the mind of a Hungarian, and will not feel with the heart of a Hungarian. We must advance our interests ourselves, soberly and courageously.
The Ukraine war has become a political football in Hungary's election campaign. Real political debate is lacking. Instead, there's mainly mudslinging between incumbent Prime Minister Orbán and his challenger, Márki-Zay.
The political left has lost its senses. They want to sleepwalk us into a war. The leftists want to send Hungarian soldiers, Hungarian weapons to the front. We won't allow that to happen.
Before he was lying about us wanting to bring in migrants to Hungary, now he's lying about us wanting to send kids to die in Ukraine. It's disgusting and distasteful.
Accusations, falsehoods, provocations. For Marton Gulyas, these are incentive enough to take a stand and reveal the urgent need for independent reporting during this election campaign.
I would be able to do my work in a better way if government-related people would accept my invitation. This kind of a bubble which they artificially created around the government-related voters, it hurts not just the entire society, but especially those voters.
And so Marton Gulyas and his mobile TV studio head back on the road. They plan many more broadcasts between now and Election Day.
Well, clearly the opposition has still got a lot of work to do if it's going to push Orbán hard in April's vote. And for now, that was all on this edition of Focus on Europe. Do come back next time round. Until then, bye-bye and tschüss.
What's empathy training and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
Please address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
He was hit from behind. Nasty head injury.
I want to see him.
You're not family.
He doesn't have family here.
Well, he and Farrell have been sniffing around that case all over town. Maybe they found something.
Troppo, log into ABC iView and stream the whole series now.
Acquitted for murder.
I've had to spend 12.5 years in prison for something I didn't do.
After revelations of planted evidence.
I would rate this case as one of the most extraordinary cases I've ever been involved in.
And a family still waiting for answers.
We want justice for Stacey. It's almost like it's all been swept under the carpet now. Tell me, what happened to my baby sister?
The Cost of Justice on Australian Story. Monday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma.
About things that haven't happened yet.
What if you could live to 150?
Would the world be better without lies?
No.
If you had a deep fake video of you... Are we going to the tape?
Well, there are thousands of gods. How do you know you've chosen the right one?
You want me to answer that in a light entertainment format?
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Next time on Artworks, we're coming to you from the Lawn Sculpture Biennale.
For me, the journey of life is one that leaves a mark, and the sea speaks very strongly to me of that.
We also explore the Sydney Biennale.
Artworks, Wednesday at 8 on ABC iView and TV+.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you across all the federal budget updates as they happen in Canberra and tell you what it means for your hip pocket.
Plus, Australia farewells cricketing legend Shane Warne. Will have extensive coverage of his state memorial from the MCG. See you then.
They have not one single idea what doing this job does to a person.
A chilling new cold case.
Why would someone keep a body for 30 years?
You never know what someone's capable of.
I could tell you a thing or two that would make your hair turn grey.
I want to know who those passengers were and if any of them are still serving coppers.
Leads to an unthinkable tragedy.
I just want it over. I shouldn't even be here.
All new Unforgotten. Log into ABC iView and stream it now.
What is the effect of telling and hearing diverse stories?
The mood, obviously, of Ukrainians has been changing kind of dramatically.
The world needs to act now.
Houses and locations that have never flooded before are flooding.
Get a different perspective.
Look at this panel. This is a dream come true, this panel.
On the stories of the day.
I found the last 10 minutes of this show pretty extraordinary.
Just stand there and do that. It all counts.
The Drum, weeknights on ABC TV and ABC iView.
It doesn't change who you are.
The Prime Minister told Parliament he has been
Justice and humanity.
W News live from Berlin. Smoke in the skies in the west of Ukraine. Local authorities in the city of Lviv report 3 new major explosions. This comes as Moscow signals a shift in focus to the eastern Donbas region. Also on the show, U.S. President Joe Biden is in Warsaw, where he's held his first meeting with Ukrainian officials since the war began. Following those talks, he's set to call for the West to stand up against Russia's invasion. We'll take you to Poland to take a look at what is being done to help those most in need. Hello, I'm Claire Richards, and a warm welcome to the show. We begin with breaking news from the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where there have been reports of 3 powerful explosions. Lviv is located around 70 kilometers from the Polish border and has been seen as something of a safe haven for those fleeing the Russian invasion of the eastern, northern, and southern parts of Ukraine. After the blasts, black smoke was seen rising above the city. A local city council official called on people to remain calm and to stay in their homes. let's get straight across to DW's correspondent, Fanny Fachar, who is reporting for us from Lviv. Fanny, tell us, what have you seen and heard?
We were in the middle of editing a story for DW News for tomorrow as I heard explosions, and some of us actually in the hotel thought maybe this is just thunder, as it was really windy all day. It started to rain, but it turned out it wasn't thunder. It was several explosions. It's yet not confirmed actually what the target of that attack was. The governor here of the state says that apparently 4 people have been wounded in 2 airstrikes. But once again, the conflicting information here: how many airstrikes, how many explosions, and not even talking about just really how many people were wounded in it. I never thought and believed that actually I would have to wear a flak jacket and a helmet in Lviv, the biggest city of Western Ukraine, because actually this is a part of Ukraine that so far more or less was considered safe, even though just over a week ago, on March 18th, the civilian airport, which is about 7 kilometers from here, was also hit without casualties, thankfully. But it clearly tells you that these attacks, these airstrikes, indicate that even the western part of Ukraine is not safe. The question really is whether these airstrikes are more of a symbolic, have a more of a symbolic meaning to scare people than actually damage a lot of things. We do not know that yet.
Now, despite these explosions, it does appear that people there are out in the streets. What was the reaction to this from where you were?
Exactly. Even now, you probably see people are walking behind me. Actually, the air raid siren, that signal that something is going to happen or is likely to happen, it's not over yet. So people are actually meant to be inside, in a bomb shelter, in a bunker, or just be it in their bathrooms in their apartments, because that's deemed the most safe place in any apartment. However, yes, you see also people walking around, because it's obviously not the first time that they hear an air raid. Sometimes you hear it several times a day, and in a way, ironically or not, but people are actually getting used to this. It's been almost, well, it's the second month actually of this war that started on February 24th, and people kind of develop a routine when they hear an air raid. However, certainly more people are inside, but then that speculation whether it's to the bad weather or actually to the air raid, we do not know, but there are always very mixed reactions when there's an air raid siren. However, given the fact that this is for the second time that missiles have hit, cruise missiles hit Lviv, it certainly indicates that more is to come. In fact, on the Twitter page of the mayor of Lviv, people are warned to stay at home because he expects more airstrikes to come and to hit Lviv today.
And Fanny, can you give us a sense of how close you are to where these explosions took place? And how close they are to the center, for that matter?
Quite close. Yes, quite close, given if really those missiles hit apparently the TV tower, but that's not confirmed yet. If that was the case, it's really just a few kilometers from here. But as I say, there's a lot of speculation what was actually hit. So as long as we do not know that information, I can only say that it happened towards the eastern part of Lviv, the eastern outskirts of the city center. But we could hear the explosions ourselves here in the city center, and smoke has been photographed actually by one of my colleagues rising over a building. But once again, I do not want to feed into any speculation here as long as we do not have more information, as we're waiting to hear for more information what really the target was of that explosion that happened just about an hour ago here in Lviv, in the biggest city of Western Ukraine.
Our correspondent, Fanny Fachar, reporting for us in Lviv. Thank you so much for that update. So Ukraine has now seen a month of fighting that has left thousands dead and forced more than 10 million people to flee their homes. Now, Moscow has said it's shifting its focus to Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. And while the Kremlin claims it has largely successfully completed the first phase of what it calls its military operation, analysts say it could be a sign Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to save face after failing to subdue Ukraine or to capture its capital, Kyiv. But as Moscow changes focus, the human suffering from its invasion shows no sign of abating.
Signs of spring greeted Kyiv on Saturday as Ukraine shakes off its winter and enters a new phase of war. There may be a change in strategy after Russian defeats, but there's little respite for those on the front lines of battle. Many are visibly exhausted but steadfast in their determination to stay.
Путин пришел
Putin came, as you can see, he says. Our children and grandchildren are dying. I'm 62. I can't leave this place. I'll stay here. If need be, I will die here. But I will not give them Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have recaptured areas on the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv. Still, lives continue to be destroyed. At this hospital in Kharkiv, the wounded continue to arrive as Ukrainian forces come under heavy fire. In Mariupol, the damage inflicted by Russian bombs is clear. Unfortunately, nothing remains of Mariupol, and they're bombing it with savage weapons. This last week, there have been explosions like I've never heard before. They hit residential areas with rockets. Hundreds continue to flee Mariupol, saying goodbye to their decimated city and to those who must stay behind.
Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent, Nick Connolly, and we asked him what people in Ukraine and in Russia are likely to make of Moscow's announcement today.
I think there are very few people here in Ukraine who would take that announcement at face value. I think this is more about trying to make lesser demands, make a more manageable goal to then sell to the Russian public as a success, given what is arguably a fiasco in the rest of the country and Russia's failure to make significant progress in recent weeks. Going into this, you had messages from Moscow about being able to take Kiev in a matter of days rather than weeks, and that obviously hasn't happened. Indeed, there is a lot of fighting beyond Donbass, not just around me here in Kiev, 25 kilometers down the road in Irpin. The fighting continues, although it seems like the Ukrainians have been able to push back Russian forces quite significantly in some places near Kiev. In the south, around Mykolaiv and Kherson, is some news coming in today that even the Ukrainians were able to return to Kherson, which had been the one major Ukrainian city under full Russian control so far. So pretty difficult to really judge those carefully because there aren't many journalists, independent journalists on the ground, but a sense that this is a war that is very much going on, and this is by no means the beginning of the end.
This is our correspondent Nick Connolly for us in Kyiv. We also spoke to Dr. Aglaya Snetkov. She's a lecturer in international politics at University College London School of Slavonic and East European Studies. And we asked her how the war is being portrayed within Russia and how Russians are reacting to it.
So at this stage, we haven't seen much of sort of pushback against Putin. Now, we have to keep in mind that we are sort of back into the land of sort of criminology. So we have to watch and sort of look at what's going on because we don't have much information about what's going on inside the regime. In the country, it seems that most Russians see the sanctions and the effects that are happening on the ground. They're blaming that on the West sort of wanting to destroy Russia. So they're not associating that with Putin's failure in Ukraine. They're very much associating that with sort of the West hating Russia. Now, there have been reports of sort of the Russian defense minister, Shoigu, suffering from sort of heart problems. There have been sort of talk about potential sort of Putin regime going against some of their senior officials. We haven't seen that at this stage. So I think the support is still there, but there is a clear recognition, even at the senior level, that the original goals of the operation just haven't succeeded.
Let's bring you up to speed now with some other developments in the war in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron has proposed an international mission to evacuate people from Mariupol, the Ukrainian city devastated by Russian attacks. Macron said he was working on a humanitarian operation together with Turkey and Greece, and he would soon call Russian President Vladimir Putin to work out the details. Crowds unfurled a giant Ukrainian flag and shouted, "Go home," at a rally in Slavutich after Russian forces entered the city and seized a hospital in the town. Russian forces responded by firing into the air and deploying stun grenades to disperse the crowd. And more than 130 refugees from Ukraine have arrived in Germany from Moldova. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have fled to the small former Soviet republic. Germany plans to airlift 2,500 refugees out of Moldova to help it deal with the new arrivals. On his second day in Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden is set to deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The White House says the president will call on the free world to stand against Vladimir Putin. Now, President Biden is in Warsaw for talks with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda. The two are set to discuss the situation in Ukraine with the West's military, humanitarian, and economic response to the war on the agenda. Earlier, Biden also met with the Ukrainian foreign minister and defense minister in his first face-to-face talks with top Ukrainian officials since the war began. And for more, let's go to our correspondent, Barbara Vazel, who is outside the royal castle in Warsaw, where we expect U.S. President Joe Biden to speak soon. Barbara, what can we expect to hear from Biden today?
The White House has announced this as a groundbreaking speech, a speech that will set the course for the future for Western countries and NATO and generally the alliance to deal with the war in Ukraine. How do we position ourselves? We need to be unified. That is supposed to be one of the messages. We need to be strong in defending democracy, because the fight that is being fought in Ukraine is not only their own. It's it's the fight of all Western countries, the fight of democracies against autocratic countries. So this is the vein this speech will be trying to sort of set out the course for the next weeks and months and maybe years of dealing with Russia and particularly dealing with Vladimir Putin.
Now, this speech we're expecting will come off the heels of Biden's meeting with the Polish president earlier today. Do we know what came out of that?
Of course, Joe Biden again sort of told the Polish president that, yes, Article 5 of the NATO treaty, that's the article where member states promise each other that they will defend each single member state against invasions or incursions from the outside. That is valid. That article really sort of holds true, and we will stick to it. Joe Biden said we will do this. So Poland, of course, being a borderline state here, the outer the outer side of the NATO countries, is scared in a way that the war might sort of go across the border, that they might have to defend themselves against Russian incursions, maybe bombs or maybe incursions in the airspace. So that is yet to be seen, but Joe Biden tried to really reassure the Polish side. They want 30,000 US soldiers stationed in Poland permanently. That's their wish. At the moment, there are about 10,000. We don't know yet whether Biden made any additional promises there. But of course, generally, he's really trying to do everything to tell Poland that, yes, we're by your side and we recognize your situation and you're being very brave in dealing with it and dealing particularly with the stream of refugees that is reaching Poland on a daily basis.
And in addition to the 30,000 soldiers, are there other concrete demands that Poland has made?
Poland has presented a whole 10-point plan. They want much tougher measures against Vladimir Putin and against Russia. They say, for instance, we need to have a humanitarian mission, international mission, under the protection of NATO, the United Nations, whoever, in order to alleviate the situation in areas like Mariupol, where civilians are caught in these horrible siege situations. And that's their main demand, really. But there is more. They say sanctions need to be much tougher. They need to come immediately. We can't wait to cut off oil and gas till the end of the year. It needs to be done now. Trade with Russia that is still flowing through Belarus, for instance, is supposed to be cut off totally. So there's a whole range of measures. Many of them could be done relatively quickly, but the main one, the demand for a humanitarian mission into Ukraine, that is something that the American side has so far tried to sort of block off. But we heard, for instance, from the French President Emmanuel Macron today that he also reiterates that call and says, yes, we can't watch what's happening there. We have to figure out a way to help people and to get them out. So he is also raising his voice for a mission. So slowly the alliance might be moving that way, but it doesn't look particularly quickly.
Barbara Vazel for us in Warsaw. Thank you so much for your reporting. Now, as Barbara mentioned, Western countries have imposed economic sanctions on Russia over its war. But so far, the European Union has been reluctant to stop imports of Russian fossil fuels, which make up a large share of Europe's energy mix. Leaders have been scrambling to find replacements.
Pipelines, still bringing Russian gas into the EU. Around 40% of Europe's gas consumption comes from Russia, which is why EU leaders haven't been able to agree a ban on imports as a way of trying to force Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. But what they did do at a summit in Brussels, attended by President Biden, is agree a deal to buy more gas from the US.
We need to work toward developing infrastructure which will allow us a greater capacity to move gas where we need it. That means we have taken a conscious decision to better connect national networks.
The plan is to increase imports from America by an additional 15 billion cubic meters this year, with an aim to increasing that to 50 billion per year in the coming years. Currently, EU imports from America stand at 22 billion cubic meters annually. The EU's annual dependence on Russia is 150 billion cubic meters, though, so the increases from the US won't be enough to plug the gap.
I know that eliminating Russian gas will have costs for Europe, but it's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, it's going to put us on a much stronger strategic footing.
What isn't clear from the statement is how much more expensive the gas coming from the US will be for Europe, or how shipping ports, which are already nearly at capacity for importing gas, will be expanded. Liquefied natural gas doesn't just flow through pipelines like Russian gas does.
There's the well in America. You take a bucket of gas out, liquefy it, put it on a ship, send it across the Atlantic. It goes into an import terminal, which will take that liquid gas, turn it back into gaseous gas, and then it goes into the domestic pipeline infrastructure and is used exactly the same way that the Russian would be. But there are all those steps.
Following the agreement with the US, EU leaders continued their summit and hit a major friction point over whether governments should now be allowed to intervene in the markets to cap energy prices, which are soaring for their citizens.
And many of those who flee Ukraine often arrive traumatized in neighboring countries. The war itself, the sudden need to leave everything behind, and the journey out, as well as the uncertainty of what might come next. All of that can be overwhelming. Well, DW's Monika Sharacka sent us this report from the train station in Przemyśl on the Polish border with Ukraine. There she met Ewa Budne, a Polish psychotherapist who is offering new arrivals psychological first aid.
Eine 25-jährige junge Frau.
And meanwhile, more than 500,000 people have fled to Moldova's neighbor, Romania. The country is a member of both the European Union and NATO, and is the second most frequent destination for Ukrainian refugees after Poland. Many arrive with harrowing tales of their escape from the war.
It's just a short ride to safety, but for many here, it comes after a long and perilous journey. This family reunited at the docks. Some came by ferry, others over land, leaving behind a home caught in some of the fiercest fighting so far.
In Mykolaiv, the situation is very bad. It is being shelled from every direction. People who are able to flee are fleeing. It is hard. I want to go home. I want to go home very much.
Ukraine's short border with Romania runs along the Danube River. Ferries land at the town of Isacha. With only a few thousand inhabitants, it has become yet another transit point as refugees flow out of Ukraine. Many of the new arrivals are fleeing southern Ukraine, where the Russians have been attacking cities like Mykolaiv, near the Black Sea coast, and moving towards the major port city of Odessa.
I could have never believed in such things before. Honestly, this is a shock. We could have never believed that the sky would have been so dangerous, that we'd be afraid of airplanes and other things. I didn't expect any of this. Every day there is death, there's destruction. So to be there is very scary, especially with small children. That's why we left. We first went to Odessa, stayed there for one night, but there are air raid sirens every day, destruction, shots fired, the whole package.
The Red Cross has set up tents to welcome the Ukrainians. But these tents and this town are just another transit point for those arriving. Their journey is far from over.
We're going to turn our attention now to some of the other stories we are following for you at this hour. A Saudi-led coalition has launched overnight airstrikes on the Yemen capital Sana'a and the Red Sea city of Hodeidah, killing at least 7 people. The attack came a day after Iranian-backed Houthi rebels staged a daring attack on an oil depot in the Saudi city of Jeddah, ahead of today's Formula One race in the kingdom. A volcano has erupted near a scenic lake in the Philippines. Authorities raised the alert level in the region and urged residents to evacuate. There have been volcanic earthquakes and concerns that further eruptions may occur. Now, experts are warning of possible fast-moving gas and a tsunami in the lake. And Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of celebrated rock band The Foo Fighters, has died while on tour with the band in Colombia. The 50-year-old joined the group, formed by ex-Nirvana musician Dave Grohl, in 1997. In a statement, the band called his death a tragic and untimely loss. You're watching DW News. Before we go, let's get a recap of our main stories at this hour. 3 powerful explosions have been heard in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Black smoke was also seen rising above the city. Local officials have called on people to remain calm and to stay in their homes. And on his second day in Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden has met face-to-face with Ukrainian officials. Later, he will deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The U.S. president will call on the West to stand against Vladimir Putin. Just a quick reminder, you can always get DW News on the go. Just download our app from Google Play or in the App Store. Now, that will give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. And if you yourself are part of a news story, you can also use that DW app to send us photos and videos of what's been happening. That's all from me for now. Up next, in just a moment, we will have a DW News Africa, so do stay tuned for that. And don't forget, you can find all the latest news and analysis on our website. That's dw.com, or you can check us out on social media, Instagram and Twitter at DW News. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. I'll be back with more news headlines at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you across all the federal budget updates as they happen in Canberra and tell you what it means for your hip pocket.
Plus, Australia farewells cricketing legend Shane Warne. Will have extensive coverage of his state memorial from the MCG. See you then.
The worst possible place for human beings to live in the face of climate change would be Australia.
Future forecast.
It's just far worse than we all expect it's going to be.
Collectively, we have not done enough.
Question is, how bad are we willing to let it get?
The human impact of our climate in crisis.
I'm incredibly angry that so many people died.
The world has to understand that this is a make or break moment.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
This town has just lurched from one disaster to another.
You can't leave it to the bureaucracies to lead you out of this.
Malakuta needs to advocate for what we want.
People's Republic of Malakuta starts April 5 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Basketball's best are booming to the finals. Stream every electrifying play live on ABC iView.
What a statement.
The WNBL Finals. Stream all finals live on ABC iView.
When I think of democracy, I think
Sausage sizzle?
Sausage.
Well, I think of Greeks, obviously.
Democracy is the moment when the powerless are powerful.
Privilege
is a privilege. We all get to have a say in the future of our country.
Acquitted for murder.
I've had to spend 12.5 years in prison for something I didn't do.
After revelations of planted evidence.
I would rate this case as one of the most extraordinary cases I've ever been involved in.
And a family still waiting for answers.
We want justice for Stacey.
It's almost like it's all been swept under the carpet now.
Tell me, what happened to my baby sister?
The Cost of Justice on Australian Story. Monday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Australia's roadmap to recovery. What the make or break budget means for the government, the country and for you. From 7:30, the Treasurer's speech, then all the interviews and expert analysis in the ABC News Budget Special. Budget Night 2022, Tuesday, ABC TV, iView, radio and online.
We're selling an idea of paradise, summers that never end.
What about loyalty? What about friendship?
Snapper's building an empire. This is war.
Barons starts April 24 on ABC or log into ABC iView.
We like our technology, we believe in our technology.
It's automated to a level where one person can operate it.
This isn't a 70s disco, it's a paddock. But here, there's no soil to till, no bugs or disease to contend with, and whether it's sunny outside doesn't matter in the slightest, thanks to the tens of thousands of twinkling LED lights. This is vertical farming, where the crop is grown entirely inside an industrial warehouse.
Basically go from seed to harvest of green leafy vegetables, salad greens, herbs inside about a 28-day period.
It looks and is pretty high-tech. Fully operational, the vertical farm can produce around 500 kilograms of cut leafy greens per week, 52 weeks a year. And it's almost entirely automated.
We're sitting in the control room of what we call an XA series automated warehouse growing system. And it's automated to a level where one person can operate it totally.
Today, that one person is John Leslie, a director of Vertical Farm Systems. With just the click of a mouse, John's able to set the entire harvest and planting process in motion. First, seeds are planted via an automatic seeder directly into clay pebbles, then watered with something dramatically referred to as an organic germination accelerant, and transported down the line to their new home for the next month.
The system moves that growing tray towards a climate cell. It lifts it to the correct level. There are 8 levels in a climate cell. And then it opens the door relevant, pushes in the tray, and the tray will stay in there for 28 days while it grows.
Meanwhile, inside the climate cell, everything is kept under control by computers. Light, water, humidity and temperature are all strictly regulated by large dehumidifiers and about 60,000 LED lights. The crop is what's referred to as bioponic. Biologically active microbes are added to the clay pebbles to maximise plant health and growth. But it's different to hydroponic because while it's soilless, it's not grown in water, although the crop does still get a good drink.
We use a flood and drain system, so basically in the 28 days nothing touches the leaf. There's no top watering, so that leaf that comes out is sort of pharmaceutical grade food almost.
At the end of the grow cycle, the mature plants are lowered onto the transport rails and automatically harvested.
The bench is washed and sterilised, organic matter collected for composting, and the clay pebbles recovered and reused. Then the whole process begins again.
A cycle for a tray is 12 minutes to plant it and to put it into the cell, and for the other tray that is pushed out the other end of the cell to come down and to get harvested and then to be washed and reloaded and ready to seed again.
This technology has taken almost a decade to develop, troubleshoot and fine-tune. It obviously raises questions, though, about replacing jobs. An operation of this size would generally be manned by a dozen or more people. In the building phase, it's taken a lot of manpower.
We had to engineer and design the whole system and make sure that it's structurally correct and functionally correct, and then looking for suppliers. We had to get a lot of tooling made for injection moulding and casting and extruding, and now we have 43 suppliers globally that provide all our components for us.
And it's all happening here, tucked away inside a shed on a picturesque farm near the small township of Yandina on Queensland's Sunshine Coast.
We envisaged 2 years, but understanding the concept of vertical farming and the risks and hazards in relation to the medium that you use, the nutrients that you use, the ability to be sustainable, has made it a lot longer journey than what we thought it was going to be, but we're sort of here now. So 9 years on, the journey's been worth it.
The thing about creating a farm environment for yourself is you can pretty much do it anywhere, including at these bustling inner-city food markets where all the action happens from inside shipping containers.
We're actually 3 metres wide by 3 metres high and 12 metres in length. So we're the same length as a traditional shipping container, but we're actually a little bit wider and a little bit higher. That enables us to be able to produce larger amounts of leafy greens in our system and give the plants an optimal space to be able to grow in.
James Pateris grew up on a more traditional broadacre farm in Victoria.
I left the family farm during a devastating drought period. So when I decided to return in the space of ag tech. The tower actually is held in by a bulkhead and a gutter system, and that's where obviously the water is captured and recycled.
Modular farming, as it's known, is similar to vertical farming, with a few key differences. It's smaller and hydroponic. They're well established in the US and Canada, but still finding their place in Australia. Leafy greens are grown in 230 vertical towers, under special lights positioned to promote the best growth. The lights vary over a 24-hour period to simulate day and night.
A lot of our air is recycled. We retreat the air through a UV light, and then we actually dehumidify that air and then feed it through to the system. With the dehumidification, we actually capture a lot of our water. So we're currently in a full farm. We're about 40 litres of water a day required, and we think that we could probably get that down to a zero requirement of external water.
This entire container farm can be controlled from a smartphone. However, it still requires a substantial time investment from people, about 25 hours a week.
We've achieved yields of around 4 tonnes a year of spinach and kale, and we produce about 1.5 tonnes worth of herbs a year. In terms of lettuce, depending on the size of lettuce that you're growing, you can achieve up to about 1,000 heads of lettuce a week.
How you going, Pete?
Awesome, looking good.
Yeah, straight out of the farm, cut today.
For now, the farm grows produce that's sold to the vendors at the markets.
A lot of them are interested in growing different types of herbs or fancy produce for a lot of their garnishes that they put on their food.
The main perk of container farming is what's happening outside really doesn't matter. So remote or isolated places where the climate can be harsh and getting access to fresh seasonal produce is difficult could really benefit.
We did a lot of research around food miles and the supply chain logistics of getting fresh food from our traditional sources. Areas in rural and isolated Australia were initially where we thought the modular farm would serve best. And of course, mining towns, where there's a large consortium of people there who demand fresh food.
But like lots of new technologies, the question most people have is, what does it cost?
At the moment, the modular farm costs about $148,000. The idea of it is that they'll be able to plug and grow once that farm is delivered. We always stress to our customers that they still need to become farmers and learn a lot about farming as they go.
And aside from the initial cost outlay, there are also running costs to consider. The big one, unsurprisingly, is electricity.
To run the modular farm, it would cost about $65 a day, and the farm itself uses on-grid electricity for now. We're also developing an off-grid module as part of our farming suite.
The vertical farming system from Yandina is also not cheap.
The facility next door with the 3 climate cells and all the automation is around about the $1.2 million mark in Australian dollars. 38% of our grow cost is electricity, so it is a capital-intensive program.
Originally, John and Ashley dreamt of taking their technology to the most needy countries and feeding the world. Now, the men are more realistic about the market for their farm systems, targeting people less concerned about the price of food and more interested in quality, freshness and food miles.
At the moment, Canada, for example, is importing up to 95% of its salad greens from South America or California. And there's no reason they can't grow them locally with this kind of technology.
It was a great harvest. That lettuce, that new lettuce is wonderful.
Excellent.
Yeah, getting a really good yield off that.
Alrighty, I'll go and put these in the fridge and leave you guys to it.
Thank you.
They plan to export the machinery, install it, commission it, and stay on for 28 days to ensure the first successful crop. But they're also hoping to find markets at home.
We'd like to be the joint venture or license, but we want to be the farmer in Australia. We see passionately that we care about the food and the quality of the food. We like our technology, we believe in our technology.
So this end of the factory here is our seeding end. So we grow.
And on Saturdays, they give anyone who's interested a chance to come and see what they're up to.
We take them in, give them a taste test, they have a pick and look around, and I think the scale of it surprises some people that it's as large and sophisticated as what it is.
The other thing that we do is when you're above relative 35% humidity, we actually become a water producer. So these 3 cells here will make about 12,000 litres of distilled water every month.
Visitors also get to see the other outside elements of the farm and how it all fits together.
We've got 69 acres here, so there's probably about 50 of that we've got the cattle on. We're heading to around about 150 head.
The cattle are grown on paddocks where the nutrient that comes from the vertical farm is used to improve soil quality and watered using rainwater collected off the shed. They catch and store about 3 million litres here on an average year.
Cattle are happy, got nice big green grass. We're hoping that that's going to help us through dry spells.
They've recently opened up a farm shop at their regional warehouse. People can see and buy the homegrown beef and, of course, the leafy greens, all harvested and packed the day prior.
Salad mix there, which is...
We're wanting to start the discussion about the quality of food that can be produced in this sort of environment. So to do that, you need to let people see it, touch it, feel it, and actually experience what it looks like in a farm like this.
Some people call them the farms of the future. But they're already here. And they're growing almost as quickly as what's growing within them, and challenging the way we think about producing food.
We don't believe that we're going to expel all the traditional farmers, but what we're able to do is introduce another means in which food can be sourced, and can be sourced locally.
Once we're up and running, we'd like to expand here, double our production. Yeah, I'm sure it'll only be the start of the next journey.
What is the effect of telling and hearing diverse stories? The mood, obviously, of Ukrainians has been changing kind of dramatically.
The world needs to act now.
Houses and locations that have never flooded before are flooding.
Get a different perspective.
Look at this panel. This is a dream come true, this panel.
On the stories of the day.
I found the last 10 minutes of this show pretty extraordinary.
Just stand there and do that. It all counts.
The Drum, weeknights on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Louis Theroux returns.
Why do you have that? My friends are famous, the rappers. They gotta be protected at all times.
To explore the most controversial corners of America.
I consented to something, and then something else happened that was without my consent. I don't know why that's hard to understand.
We're live here, guys. Say hello.
I actually enjoy racist humor and misogyny. I think that's awesome. I think we need more racist jokes.
Forbidden America. Stream now on ABC iView or Sunday 8:30 on TV+.
Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma.
About things that haven't happened yet.
What if you could live to 150? Would the world be better without lies? No.
If you had a deep fake video of you, are we going to the tape?
Well, there are thousands of gods. How do you know you've chosen the right one?
You would answer that in a light entertainment format.
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Certainly online shopping has had a big impact on that, and now we're pretty well the only one that travels around the stations.
Even in a widespread drought, someone somewhere is doing okay. The destruction Cyclone Trevor rained down on North Queensland in March, killing 500,000 cattle, revived drought-hit stations in the Channel Country hundreds of kilometres south. At Glengyle, near Birdsville, the floodwaters took weeks to arrive.
You know, one in a couple of 100-year event those poor buggers had, and the losses they suffered was pretty terrible. But yeah, we were looking forward to what we were going to get out of the other end there, and I think they'd think the same for us. They'd say, good, you know, that's just where the lay of the land is. But it was definitely tough to watch.
The riverbank spilled a slow, wonderful flood across half the station's 5,500 square kilometres. Within weeks, Glengyle was transformed.
We're in bad drought, as bad as it gets, but there's a big green strip down the middle, about 100 kilometres long and 20 or 30 k's wide, so we've got all our cattle in on that, and that'll last us for another 12, 18 months.
The station's herd was down to 400, but new feed meant 9,000 cattle from the north could be trucked in. The unique feature of Channel Country is the myriad of rivulets wriggling across the landscape. In this boom-bust country, horses trump motorbikes.
This bottom row here, these are all our working saddles, the ones we use from day to day.
The station's hub is the tack shed.
I love the history, and you look around here, we go right from the pack saddle days, bronco
ropes right to the latest saddle we've got here. We've got everything in between.
Can you imagine spending day after day in the saddle on some of the older ones?
Those tough old fellas, they must have had hard asses.
A good station saddle costs between $3,000 and $4,000. A ringer's most important tool, they must be tough, durable and comfortable. Much of Glengyle's gear is made in Stanthorpe in southeast Queensland. Lyle Kent's workshop is one of the largest saddlery business in the country, still crafting leather goods by hand.
We really believe hand stitching is the better way to go with belts and bridles and pouches and all those sort of things, yeah. Stronger and better shape, more style, yeah, that type of thing, yeah. We just, we hope there's a future for it, yeah.
I suppose it's a holding on to a heritage.
It's a tradition.
Lyle and wife Helen are legends in the station world.
Round the Pilbara here, and it's quite a long distance between places and a big circle there. Head back up through Broome, Derby, across here.
They take customer service to a new level, driving thousands of kilometres to visit clients. For 29 years, Lyle and Helen have driven their saddlery-filled truck up and across the north.
It's an incredible journey. How many Ks in how many months?
Yeah, about 35,000 Ks, yeah, 5 months of the year. And we do 140 stations in that time, and pretty well try to stop a station every single night if we can.
I think the first time I came on the trip, you know, I'd never been, you know, past the Great Dividing Range, west of really, and just the space, you know, the wide open spaces, and that still, you know, is just amazing to me. You know, you can look out in the landscape, you know, and look across the whole horizon, and it's just quite amazing.
Oh, I just love the country, love cattle stations, love the outback. Yeah, for me, I just love it, yeah.
The couple are much loved, and station managers, their families and staff look forward to their annual visit, even if all the gear could be ordered online.
It's a big thing there, like a part of the family. I've grown up with it. Yeah, you've had a pretty dry run across the Barclay there.
Very tough up north, eh? Yeah, really tough.
Riding shotgun is Dachshund Smokey, a little dog with a lot of miles on him. The truck holds everything a ringer could want.
A lot of the basic sort of gear, it's like belts and pocket knives and leatherman and barrier gear. Butchering gear is a really big thing. Different areas will go for different things. Some places I'll go for whips, others will go for bull straps and horn saws.
Steve invited 4 nearby stations to go shopping.
Print this off and I'll get the numbers and a quick show.
Oh, that's all right.
It's a get-together. You can have a yarn and chew the fat and run someone down, you know, what do you want to do?
Steve's known Lyle for 20 years, and it's become a treasured friendship.
We've just, you know, talked and caught up every year. I don't think I've ever missed them, and it's been a pleasure to have them around, and the staff enjoy it. There's a bit of a buzz when they turn up, and they're happy to spend a bit of money and get some good gear, and by this time of the year they've seen what they don't have and what some of the better ringers have got, and they want to copy them.
Lyle's handy on the leather tools. He'll do repairs, and if there's a tricky horse to fit, he'll measure it up and custom make a saddle. Selling a rookie ringer his first set of shoeing gear made his night.
Shoe puller. I love it because it really shows that those people that buy that sort of gear are sort of fair dinkum. They want to be in the industry, I think, and that's always a real sign, isn't it?
You're going to ride it tomorrow?
It doesn't happen at every stop, but this visit someone bought a saddle.
Part of the issue with the saddles is they last too long. So we've got saddles on stations like 25-year-old and they're still going.
What number is that? I'll just have to register.
And for every saddle sold, the Kent nameplate is put on by Lyle himself.
Just a wee bit, yeah, and at the end, yeah.
But it's not a Kent event until the team's station photo is taken.
You're looking. Righto, thank you. We didn't really know where it was going to go, and it's been the best thing we've done in our travels, isn't it? 2019 Glengyle photo. Added collection.
The photos feature in many station dining rooms around the country. Through the Glengyle Gallery, Steve can see his family growing up.
Just incredible how the years go, hey?
Yeah, now you can keep a track of the kids and you can watch the kids grow up right through the photos.
It was a good night, about $10,000 in sales. After a quick morning smoko break, the Kents are off again. For Lyle, one of the great satisfactions of the repeat visits is seeing young ringers change.
Their self-confidence grows and they've really found something that they can do and they enjoy. I always say, well, they start to walk and talk with a swagger and just get that sort of, wear all the, you know, the clothes.
The Kents are self-sufficient. If there's no roadhouse, they just pull over for a feed.
I guess it's been challenging sometimes, hasn't it? I think it's grown our patience and our appreciation for each other and what each of us, the part that each of us plays in it.
Probably even going back 5 or 6, 7 years ago, there was quite a number of people travelling around selling wares, you know, and generally not. They didn't generally make their own gear. They mostly sort of gear that they would sell as they went. And I think certainly online shopping has had a big impact on that. And now we're pretty well the only one that travels around the stations. Yeah.
They're heading to their 123rd station, Morney Plains. It too has come to life after 9 years of drought.
We were buggered. Even this country around here where we are here near with Homestead and all that is, that was all buggered sort of, you know, like we wouldn't have been run cattle this year.
There's a lot of mustering work to be done, moving newly arrived cattle onto the best feed. It's a magic time with a huge range of plants, Craig says, would fatten a crowbar.
There's not a bit of feed in the Channel Country that they can't eat. There's, you know, it's all palatable sort of food. Everything's edible, you know, that's a big thing, and it'll last. It's not like in the north where you get some of that feed gets bleached, and by September, October, there's no goodness left in it. This feed in this country will last through until next year, you know, till Easter.
Staff are happy to be busy again, and with the great season, there's good reason to go shopping.
They start looking for it from about anywhere from April on, I reckon. Too early in the year. You know, when's Lyle Kent going to be? Because the first thing they do, they walk into the kitchen and they see all the pictures. And straight away, you know, then they start seeing all the gear that all the blokes have. Dinner hobbles, radio holsters all got Kent on them, you know, and then they start asking questions. So by the time Lyle gets here this time of the year, you know, they're really keen.
Staff only get to town every month or so it was a busy night.
Everyone always saves up a bit of money because they know that they're going to spend a lot of money here. Yeah, and everyone gets really excited for it. Yeah, it's good.
After 29 years on the road, next year will see the end of an era when Trip 30 is over. The travelling outback settlers have decided to stop.
You see a lot of them start and stop and don't carry on, and Lyle's been there for the long haul, eh?
Lyle and Helen are back home now, busy as ever, working alongside 3 of their sons who are adamant they won't be taking over the truck run.
Some days I don't know how Mum and Dad do it, a station a day, and it's such a full-on.
Dad's a pretty hard fella and Mum's a real sweet, and yeah, they really do blend and bounce off each other, and yeah, they're a great team, it's very obvious.
Lyle and Helen will miss the hospitality, the friendships and the simplicity of life on the road. But their kids reckon Lyle could do a John Farnham and fail terribly at retirement.
Well, yeah.
You've promised,
I've
haven't you?
I've promised, yeah.
Yeah,
that's on television now.
Yeah, that's
like a
cool.
promise.
That's cool.
It's a promise.
Yeah.
He was hit from behind. Nasty head injury.
I want to see him.
You're not family.
He doesn't have family here.
Well, he and Farrell have been sniffing around that case all over town. Maybe they found something.
Troppo, log into ABC iView and stream the whole series now.
Basketball's best are booming to the finals. Stream every electrifying play live on ABC iView.
What a statement.
The WNBL Finals. Stream all finals live on ABC iView.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you across all the federal budget updates as they happen in Canberra and tell you what it means for your hip pocket.
Plus, Australia farewells cricketing legend Shane Warne. Will have extensive coverage of his state memorial from the MCG. See you then.
Acquitted for murder.
I've had to spend 12.5 years in prison for something I didn't do.
After revelations of planted evidence.
I would rate this case as one of the most extraordinary cases I've ever been involved in.
And a family still waiting for answers.
We want justice for Stacey.
It's almost like it's all been swept under the carpet now.
Tell me, what happened to my baby sister?
The Cost of Justice on Australian Story. Monday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Next time on Artworks, we're coming to you from the Lawn Sculpture Biennale.
For me, the journey of life is one that leaves a mark, and the sea speaks very strongly to me of that.
We also explore the Sydney Biennale.
Artworks, Wednesday at 8 on ABC iView and TV+.
When I think of democracy, I think sausage sizzle.
Sausage.
Well, I think of Greeks, obviously.
Democracy is the moment when the powerless are powerful.
Privilege
is a privilege. We all get to have a say in the future of our country.
W News live from Berlin. U.S. President Joe Biden is in Warsaw, where he's held his first meeting with Ukrainian officials since the war began. Now, he's set to give a major speech calling for the West and its allies to stand up against Russia's invasion. We're going to be bringing you live coverage here on DW. Also on the show, strikes on the west of Ukraine. Officials say 5 people there have been injured in multiple rocket strikes on the city of Lviv, close to the Polish border. Now, this comes despite signals from Moscow indicating a shift in focus to the eastern Donbass region. Hello, I'm Claire Richards, and a warm welcome to the show. On his second day in Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden is to deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. Now, the White House says the president will call on the West and its allies to stand against Vladimir Putin. Ahead of his address, Biden met with Ukrainian refugees outside a Warsaw football stadium, where the U.S. president called Putin a butcher. Earlier, Biden held talks with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda. The two discussed the situation in Ukraine and the West's military, humanitarian, and economic response to the war. And I'm joined now in the studio by William Glucroft, who's going to help break this down for us. William, hi. This visit by Biden and his meeting with Duda is going to be an interesting one to watch, what comes out of this speech. We know it's no secret that the Polish president and the U.S. president haven't always seen eye to eye.
That's right. Biden has kind of staked his presidency on this idea of democracy versus authoritarianism. And Poland these days, and for the last many years, is kind of somewhere in between, a democratic country with a very highly conservative government that seemed more aligned with Trump's view of the world back when Donald Trump was president. Duda is one of many officials there who took a while to ring up Joe Biden and congratulate him on becoming president in 2020. So there is some bad blood, you could say, there. Duda was also the one who came up with the whole Fort Trump idea.
That's right. Now, I just want to tell our viewers, we are looking at live images of what appears to be the U.S. motorcade with American flags arriving here. Now, William, can you tell us a little bit more? You hinted that in many ways Duda was more aligned with the Trump administration. In what sense do you mean that?
Well, we see things about, restrictions on abortion in Poland, LGBTQ plus rights, how difficult it is for those people there. And then restricting the judiciary in Poland has been the big sticking point, especially here in the European Union. Poland is a member of the EU. It gets a lot of funds from the EU to support infrastructure and these kinds of things. The EU has been holding back a lot of otherwise earmarked support for Poland as retribution, as punishment, as consequence for not sticking to EU rules on rule of law, transparency, democratic values. And these are all things that the U.S. president also says he stands for. And he's, in the past, highlighted Poland as one country of several that seems to be backsliding into authoritarianism. But at the same time, standing up to Russia right now, Poland has always been very, very hard on Russia, harder than many other parts of the EU, like Germany. So you see this very much a tale of two countries, a golden child and a black sheep, so to speak, when it comes to the Western alliance.
Right. Now, what's been interesting also about Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that we have seen such a strong show of unity among Western allies that has even taken some by surprise, how strongly they have come together. And it has required some huge shifts in policy. That's been quite apparent here in Germany, perhaps most of all.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because of Brexit, because of Donald Trump's treatment of his allies, particularly here in Europe, there has been a lot of disunity among the traditional Western alliance over the last 5-10 years, let's say, trying to figure out what exactly their position is vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis China, terrorism, climate change, these kinds of major issues. And there's not been a lot of unity on that front. And what's the best way to get unity than to have a common enemy, a common cause? And we're seeing that absolutely, as you say, right here in Germany with this sudden, huge about face after years of running from hard power, running from military power, now running from the modernizing, investing in their armed forces, leaving that to others. You have a country that's about to put 100 billion euros on top of its already existing spending for a one-off topping up of defense expenditures. And going forward, it's looking like, larger military budgets from here on out. Could be a challenge. They want to get that into the Constitution to make that constitutional protection, to make sure that those budgets are always there for the military. So there's a long legislative process still left to go. But Germany is a country currently led by three parties. Two of them believe themselves to be anti-war, pro-peace, disarmament parties, anti-nuclear parties. The third one, the Free Democrats, they're the ones who are low tax, low spending. So we're seeing a complete shift in ideology here in Germany based on events that have unfolded in the last several weeks.
And I just want to draw our viewers' attention back to the live images that we are seeing here. We are waiting for Joe Biden to make a major speech in Warsaw. We expect him to call for the West and its allies to stand up against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We're going to be bringing live coverage of that speech once it begins. It appears the motorcade is just on its way in. With me in the studio here is William Glucroft with analysis. William, I want to ask you we've just spoken about the unity among the EU and among NATO partners, but what are some of the fundamental differences within the EU when it comes to their response to Russia?
Yeah, there's a calibration issue, right? Both within the EU itself, there's differing opinions about how hard to go on sanctions, how hard to go on energy embargoes, how hard to go on the kind of military support for Ukraine. You have countries like Poland and the Baltic states who have a bad history with Russia and have been warning the rest of the European Union for years, watch out for this. This is not just our post-communist trauma or post-communist paranoia. They've been warning about Russia for a long, long time. Wanting harder sanctions, wanting more military presence, wanting NATO to do more. We saw that Poland's offer of its MiG-29 jets that the U.S., no pun intended, shot down. And you're seeing, from the U.S. side, very hard sanctions, increasing sanctions, the oil-gas embargo, which the EU especially is not there yet. We've been hearing about it a lot. It's worth repeating. The European Union is incredibly dependent on Russia for its energy. Something like 40% of European Union's gas comes from Russia, whereas the United States is something like 3%. The U.S. is also, of course, its own major exporter and producer of natural gas. Very much what the EU is going through now with its dependency on Russia and the geopolitical problems it's causing. The U.S. faced 25 years ago after 9/11, this dependency on Arab oil and how it was fueling extremism and fueling instability in the Middle East. We're seeing now how petro-euros going to Russia is fueling instability here in Europe. And the U.S. did, by and large, get off or lower its dependence on Arab oil and gas. Now the question is, can the European Union do the same thing with Russia?
Right, so Biden and the EU finding themselves in totally different situations in that sense.
Absolutely, and Russia is right here, of course, whereas the U.S. is much more geographically isolated from that fact.
But within the EU itself, are there differences of opinion on meeting energy needs?
Oh, of course. Again, Poland, the Baltic states, they seem ready to have an energy embargo, even though that would mean massive, massive economic fallout here in the European Union, job losses. We heard this from Olaf Scholz this week. He basically said the pain that sanctions and embargoes would inflict on Russia cannot be less than the pain that would be inflicted on European Union citizens, on German citizens. And that is what they're trying to calibrate. Germany, we heard also this from Robert Habeck, that's the economics and climate minister here in Germany, really the guy responsible for figuring out how to get Germany off of Russian dependency on gas and oil, going to Qatar, going to other countries with oil-producing states, trying to figure out how to offset this, had a big statement yesterday morning talking about how Germany can gradually get off, for sure, oil and coal from Russia. Much harder to get off the gas because of how many pipelines come from Russia through Ukraine and through the Baltic to provide Germany a highly industrialized, highly energy-intensive economy, and one of the biggest in the world with its energy. This is really the challenge going forward. There is, and there's a lot of debate about how much Germans, both politically speaking and in terms of public support among voters, are really willing to feel any pain for the punishment that they're going to inflict on Russia.
So this is clearly the backdrop against which this speech is taking place. We are looking at live pictures, waiting for Biden to arrive. We just saw there an American flag, a Polish flag. The stage is set, waiting for him to deliver, for Biden to deliver a speech in Warsaw on the war in Ukraine. Now, William, earlier today, Biden called Putin a butcher. I mean, earlier he's called him terms like war criminal multiple times. But what do you make of this new rhetoric?
It fits with the overall message that he's been sticking to for the last couple of weeks. In no uncertain terms, he sees Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. He even said yesterday while meeting with humanitarian aid organizations in Poland, looking at the refugee situation, he said he thinks that it's not just his opinion, but he thinks it would meet the legal standard of what it means to be a war criminal, to be tried in some kind of war criminal court, the International Criminal Court, for example. Biden is talking tough. We're hearing slightly more muted.
William, I just want to jump in and let our viewers know that you're looking there at Andrzej, or you have just seen Andrzej Duda and the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba there awaiting Biden's speech. But please carry on as you were.
So we're seeing again a calibration issue, not only when it comes to sanctions and those kinds of physical actions and penalties, but also a calibration in rhetoric. Not all European leaders are ready to be as strongly worded as Joe Biden, but also Joe Biden has a history of kind of not beating around the bush when it comes to what his thoughts are on certain people or certain policies. So it really does fit with kind of the Biden personality, I think.
And one of the other things that's foreshadowing this speech is Biden has also today cast a doubt on Russia's claims that it is planning to focus only on controlling the eastern Donbass region. What more can you tell us about that?
This is also calibration, right? There's a lot of intelligence and counterintelligence and kind of predicting moves and, you know, a lot of four-dimensional chess going on here between the U.S. And Russian sides. As we saw in the beginning of the war, where the U.S. was announcing definitive knowledge of invasion plans, and how much of it was true, how much of it wasn't, we may never know. I think Biden makes a good point. First of all, we should note that the eastern part of Ukraine has been devastated by the Russian war machine. So to say that they're now going to focus on it is a bit of a it's very difficult to hear that, because it's already been under so much duress and so much bombardment, the East more than the West. And Russia also has a way, Putin has a way of defining what victory means, right? I mean, he probably knows that he's in a bind, that he maybe got in over his head or didn't quite plan this as well as he thought. That's what all the kind of military analysts are saying right now, that he was thinking it was going to be a much easier way to Kyiv and to accomplishing his goals of essentially toppling Zelensky's government. And now he may be looking for a rhetorical way to kind of define victory, consolidate his gains. Where that actually leads, though, of course, is going to be a matter of negotiations and a matter of the next kind of statements to come out of Russia, out of Ukraine, and out of the West in the next few days.
And William, we are still waiting for Biden to begin his speech in Warsaw about the war in Ukraine. Earlier, he said, we understand that he is going to call for what he has called the free world to stand up against Russia's invasion. I mean, he's referring there to Western democratic countries. That is very explicitly Cold War language. What do you make of that?
I mean, Joe Biden is a Cold War president, basically. I mean, this man has known the Cold War. He's a foreign policy. He's known for his foreign policy credentials, and those foreign policy credentials were forged in the 4 decades of the Cold War. This is what he knows. I mean, just looking at these pictures here, it has this very kind of JFK and Berlin look to it, right? Warsaw, like Berlin, was also mostly destroyed by the Nazi invasion and just laid in ruins. I mean, everything we're seeing here that looks very old was rebuilt after the war, mostly rebuilt after the war. So there's a lot of similarities here in the kind of address of the free world rhetoric, the liberal order, the democratic order. We've already heard from Biden before this Russian invasion about democracies needing to bind together to confront authoritarianism. In that case, before the war, he was focused more on China. Now we're looking back towards Russia and China. So this is, in a way, not new. It's in a way, it's kind of the next step in this evolution of what Biden is trying to do, which is trying to give Western democracies some new strategy, some new way forward that they've really been suffering from in the last 30, 40 years. You know, since the end of the Cold War, what does America stand for? What does the West stand for? Without an enemy out there to confront, what is its purpose? And I think that's what Biden has been trying to do. Even when he came into office, long before any of this kind of aggression, he was promising a kind of a club of democracies, a conference of democracies to confront not just military aggression and military problems, but also things like climate change.
Now, this very grand scene that you reference is the Warsaw Royal Castle. You see the red carpet has been laid out. The flags are flying. You mentioned, I want to ask you about what this war in Ukraine means for U.S. plans with regard to China, which you just touched on briefly. I mean, for multiple U.S. administrations, there's been talk of pivoting to Asia. They've seemed to be unable to truly focus all of their efforts in that direction. How do you see this affecting that goal?
You know, there's been a lot of speculation and questioning about what is China's position here, because China officially likes to appear neutral. It likes to talk about preserving world order, preserving peace, preserving territorial integrity of all countries. I think we might be...
Joe Biden. We've just heard an announcement for Joe Biden.
I think I'll be quiet now.
Going to keep an eye.
President of the United States.
Let's cross live
Joe
to these
Biden.
pictures. We are having an announcement that Joe Biden is just arriving, ready to speak on the situation in Ukraine from Warsaw, Poland. Let's listen in.
Joe Biden.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please, have a seat. If you don't, come up on stage. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. Mr. President, they tell me you're over there somewhere. There you are. Thank you, Mr. President. Be not afraid. These were the first words at the first... Mr. President, they tell me you're over there somewhere. There you are. Thank you, Mr. President. Be not afraid. These were the first words at the first public address of the first Polish Pope after his election in October 1978. They were the words that would come to define Pope John Paul II. Words that would change the world. John Paul brought the message here to Warsaw in his first trip back home as Pope in June of 1979. It was a message about the power of faith, the power of resilience, the power of the people. In the face of a cruel and brutal system of government, It was a message that helped end the Soviet repression in the Central Land and Eastern Europe 30 years ago. It was a message that will overcome the cruelty and brutality of this unjust war. When Pope John Paul brought that message in 1979, the Soviet Union ruled with an iron fist behind an iron curtain. Then a year later, the Solidarity movement took hold in Poland. While I know he couldn't be here tonight, we're all grateful in America and around the world for Lech Walesa. Reminds me of that phrase of philosopher Kierkegaard: faith sees best in the dark. And they were dark moments. 10 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed, and Poland and Central and Eastern Europe would soon be free. Nothing about that battle for freedom was simple or easy. It was a long, painful slog, fought over not days and months, but years and decades. But we emerged anew in the great battle for freedom, a battle between democracy and autocracy, between liberty and repression, between a rules-based order and one governed by brute force. In this battle, we need to be clear-eyed. This battle will not be won in days or months either. We need to steel ourselves for the long fight ahead. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Mayor, members of the Parliament, distinguished guests, and the people of Poland, and I suspect some people of Ukraine that are here. We are gathered here at the Royal Castle in this city that holds a sacred place in the history of not only of Europe, but humankind's unending search for freedom. For generations, Warsaw has stood where liberty has been challenged and liberty has prevailed. In fact, it was here in Warsaw when a young refugee who fled her home country from Czechoslovakia was under Soviet domination came back to speak and stand in solidarity with dissidents. Her name was Madeleine Koebel-Albright. She became one of the most ardent supporters of democracy in the world. She was a friend with whom I served, America's first woman Secretary of State. She passed away 3 days ago. She fought her whole life for essential democratic principles. And now, in the perennial struggle for democracy and freedom, Ukraine and its people are in the front lines, fighting to save their nation. And their brave resistance is part of a larger fight for an essential democratic principles that unite all free people. The rule of law, fair and free elections, the freedom to speak, to write and to assemble, the freedom to worship as one chooses, freedom of the press. These principles are essential in a free society. But they have always been under siege. They've always been embattled. Every generation has had to defeat democracy's moral foes. That's the way of the world. For the world is imperfect, as we know, where the appetites and ambitions of a few forever seek to dominate the lives and liberty of many. My message to the people of Ukraine is a message I delivered today to Ukraine's foreign minister and defense minister, who I believe are here tonight. We stand with you, period. Today's fighting Kyiv and Metropole and Kharkiv are the latest battle in a long struggle. Hungary, 1956. Poland, 1956, and then again, 1981. Czechoslovakia, 1968. Soviet tanks crushed democratic uprisings. But the resistance continued until finally, in 1989, the Berlin Wall and all the walls of Soviet domination, they fell. They fell. And the people prevailed. But the battle for democracy could not conclude and did not conclude with the end of the Cold War. Over the last 30 years, the forces of autocracy have revived all across the globe. Its hallmarks are familiar ones: contempt for the rule of law, contempt for democratic freedom, contempt for the truth itself. Today, Russia has strangled democracy, has sought to do so elsewhere, not only in its homeland. Under false claims of ethnic solidarity, it has invalidated neighboring nations. Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. It's just cynical. He knows that. And it's also obscene. President Zelensky was democratically elected. He's Jewish. His father's family was wiped out in the Nazi Holocaust. And Putin has the audacity, like all our autocrats before him, to believe that might will make right. My own country, a former president named Abraham Lincoln voiced the opposing spirit to save our union in the midst of a civil war. He said, let us have faith that right makes might. Right makes might. Today, let us have that faith again. Let us resolve to put the strength of democracies into action to thwart the designs of autocracy. Let us remember that the test of this moment is the test of all time. The Kremlin wants to portray NATO enlargement as an imperial project aimed at destabilizing Russia. Nothing is further from the truth. NATO is a defensive alliance. It has never sought the demise of Russia. In the lead up to the current crisis, the United States and NATO worked for months to engage Russia to avert war. I met with them in person, talked to them many times on the phone. Time and again, we offered real diplomacy and concrete proposals to strengthen European security, enhance transparency, build confidence on all sides. But Putin and Russia met each of the proposals with disinterest in any negotiation, with lies and ultimatums. Russia was bent on violence from the start. I know not all of you believed me and us when we kept saying they are going to cross the border, they are going to attack. Repeatedly, he asserted we had no interest in war, guaranteed he would not move. Repeatedly saying he would not invade Ukraine. Repeatedly saying Russian troops along the border were there for training, all 180,000 of them. There's simply no justification or provocation for Russia's choice of war. It's an example of one of the oldest human impulses, using brute force and disinformation to satisfy a craving for absolute power and control. It's nothing less than a direct challenge to the rule-based international order established since the end of World War II. And it threatens to return to decades of war that ravaged Europe before the international rule-based order was put in place. We cannot go back to that. We cannot. The gravity of the threat is why the response of the West has been so swift and so powerful and so unified, unprecedented and overwhelming. Swift and punishing cost are the only things that are going to get Russia to change its course. Within days of his invasion, the West has moved jointly with sanctions to damage Russia's economy. Russia's central bank is now blocked from global financial system, denying Kremlin's access to the war fund that's stashed around the globe. We've aimed at the heart of Russia's economy by stopping the imports of Russian energy to the United States. To date, The United States has sanctioned 140 Russian oligarchs and their family members, seizing their ill-begotten gains, their yachts, their luxury apartments, their mansions. We've sanctioned more than 400 Russian government officials, including key architects of this war. These officials and oligarchs have reaped enormous benefit from the corruption connected to the Kremlin. And now they have to share in the pain. The private sector is acting as well. Over 400 private multinational companies have pulled out of doing business in Russia, left Russia completely, from oil companies to McDonald's. As a result of these unprecedented sanctions, the ruble almost is immediately reduced to rubble. The Russian economy, that's true, by the way, takes about 200 rubles to equal $1. The economy is on track to be cut in half in the coming years. It was ranked, Russia's economy was ranked the 11th biggest economy in the world before this invasion. It will soon not even rank among the top 20 in the world. Taken together, these economic sanctions are a new kind of economic statecraft with the power to inflict damage that rivals military might. These international sanctions are sapping Russia's strength, its ability to replenish its military, and its ability to project power. And it is Putin, it is Vladimir Putin who is to blame, period. At the same time, alongside these economic sanctions, the Western world has come together to provide for the people of Ukraine with incredible levels of military, economic, humanitarian assistance. In the years before the invasion, we, America, had sent over $650 million before they crossed the border in weapons to Ukraine, including anti-air and anti-armor equipment. Since the invasion, America has committed another $1.35 billion in weapons and ammunition. And thanks to the courage and bravery of the Ukrainian people, the equipment we've sent and our colleagues have sent have been used to devastating effect to defend Ukrainian land and airspace. Our allies and partners have stepped up as well. But as I've made clear, American forces are in Europe, not in Europe, to engage in conflict with Russian forces. American forces are here to defend NATO allies. Yesterday, I met with the troops that are serving alongside our Polish allies to bolster NATO's frontline defenses. The reason we wanted to make clear is their movement on Ukraine don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. And earlier today, I visited your national stadium where thousands of Ukrainian refugees are now trying to answer the toughest questions a human can ask. My God, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? I saw tears in many of the mothers' eyes as I embraced them. They're young children. They're young children, not sure whether to smile or cry. One little girl said, "Mr. President," she spoke a little English, "if my brother and my daddy, are they going to be okay? Will I see them again?" Without their husbands, their fathers, in many cases, their brothers and sisters who stayed back to fight for their country. I didn't have to speak the language or understand the language to feel the emotion in their eyes, where they gripped my hand. Little kids hung onto my leg, praying with a desperate hope that all this is temporary. Apprehension that they may be perhaps forever away from their homes. Almost a debilitating sadness that this is happening all over again. But I was also struck by the generosity of the people of Warsaw, for that matter, all the Polish people, for the depths of their compassion, their willingness to reach out, opening their hearts say to the mayor and the premier they're opening their hearts and their homes simply to help. I also want to thank my friend, the great American chef, Jose Andres, and his team for help feeding those who are yearning to be free. But helping these refugees is not something Poland or any other nation should carry alone. All the world democracies have a responsibility to help, all of them. And the people of Ukraine can count on the United States to meet its responsibility. I've announced 2 days ago we will welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. We already have 8,000 a week coming to the United States of other nationalities. We'll provide nearly $300 million in humanitarian assistance, providing tens of thousands of tons of food, water, medicine, and other basic supplies. In Brussels, I announced the United States is prepared to provide more than $1 billion in additional humanitarian aid. The World Food Program told us that despite significant obstacles, at least some relief is getting to major cities in Ukraine, but not Metropole. No, excuse me, not Mariupol, because Russian forces are blocking relief supplies. But we'll not cease our efforts to get humanitarian relief wherever it is needed in Ukraine and for the people who have made it out of Ukraine. Notwithstanding the brutality of Vladimir Putin, let there be no doubt that this war has already been a strategic failure for Russia already. Having lost children myself, I know that's no solace to the people who've lost family. But he, Putin, thought Ukrainians would roll over and not fight. Not much of a student of history. Instead, Russian forces have met their match with brave and stiff Ukrainian resistance. Rather than breaking Ukrainian resolve, Russia's brutal tactics have strengthened the resolve. Rather than driving NATO apart, the West is now stronger and more united than it has ever been. Russia wanted less of a NATO presence on his border, but now he has a stronger presence, a larger presence, with over 100,000 American troops here, along with all the other members of NATO. In fact, Russia has managed to cause something I'm sure he never intended. The democracies of the world are revitalized with purpose and unity found in months that we'd once taken years to accomplish. It's not only Russia's actions in Ukraine that are reminding us of democracy's blessing. It's our own country, his own country, the Kremlin. It's jailing protesters. 200,000 people have allegedly already left. There's a brain drain leaving Russia, shutting down independent news. State media is all propaganda, blocking the image of civilian targets, mass graves, starvation tactics of the Russian forces in Ukraine. Is it any wonder, as I said, that 200,000 Russians have already left their country in 1 month? A remarkable brain drain in such a short period of time. Which brings me to my message to the Russian people. I've worked with Russian leaders for decades. I sat across the negotiating table going all the way back to Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin to talk arms control at the height of the Cold War. I've always spoken directly and honestly to you, the Russian people. Let me say this, if you're able to listen. You, the Russian people, are not our enemy. I refuse to believe that you welcome the killing of innocent children and grandparents, or that you accept hospitals, schools, maternity wards, and for God's sake, being pummeled with Russian missiles and bombs, or cities being surrounded so that civilians cannot flee, supplies cut off, and attempting to starve Ukrainians into submissions. Millions of families are being driven from their homes, including half of all Ukraine's children. These are not the actions of a great nation. Of all people, you, the Russian people, as well as all people across Europe, still have the memory of being in a similar situation in the late 30s and 40s. Situation in World War II, still fresh in the minds of many grandparents in the region. Whatever your generation experienced, whether it experienced the siege of Leningrad or heard about it from your parents and grandparents, train stations overflowing with terrified families fleeing their homes, nights sheltering in basements and cellars, mornings sitting through the rubble in your homes. These are not memories of the past, not anymore, because it's exactly what the Russian army is doing in Ukraine right now. March 26, 2022, just days before we're at the 21st, you were a 21st century nation with hopes and dreams that people all over the world have for themselves and their family. Now, Vladimir Putin's aggression have cut you, the Russian people, off from the rest of the world. And it's taking Russia back to the 19th century. This is not who you are. This is not the future you deserve for your families and your children. I'm telling you the truth. This war is not worthy of you, the Russian people. Putin can and must end this war. The American people will stand with you and the brave citizens of Ukraine who want peace. My message to the rest of Europe, this new battle for freedom has already made a few things crystal clear. First, Europe must end its dependence on Russian fossil fuels, and we, the United States, will help. That's why just yesterday in Brussels, I announced the plan with the President of the European Commission to get Europe through the immediate energy crisis. Over the long term, as a matter of economic security and national security for the survivability of the planet, we all need to move as quickly as possible to clean, renewable energy. And we'll work together to help get that done so that the days of any nation being subject to the whims of a tyrant for its energy needs are over. They must end. They must end. And second, we have to fight the corruption coming from the Kremlin to give the Russian people a fair chance. And finally, most urgently, we maintain absolute unity. We must among the world's democracies. It's not enough to speak with rhetorical flourish of ennobling words of democracy, of freedom, equality, and liberty. All of us, including here in Poland, must do the hard work of democracy each and every day. My country as well. That's why I came to Europe again this week with a clear and determined message for NATO, for the G7, for the European Union, for all freedom-loving nations. We must commit now to be in this fight for the long haul. We must remain unified today and tomorrow and the day after, and for the years and decades to come. It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay, because the darkness that drives autocracy is ultimately no match for the flame of liberty that lights the souls of free people everywhere. Time and again, history shows that it's from the darkest moments that the greatest progress follows. And history shows this is the task of our time, the task of this generation. Let's remember the hammer blow that brought down the Berlin Wall. The might that lifted the Iron Curtain were not the words of a single leader. It was the people of Europe who for decades fought to free themselves. Their sheer bravery opened the border between Austria and Hungary for the pan-European picnic. They joined hands for the Baltic Way. They stood for solidarity here in Poland. And together, it was an unmistakable and undeniable force of the people that the Soviet Union could not withstand. And we're seeing it once again today with the brave Ukrainian people showing that their power of many is greater than the will of any one dictator. So in this hour, let the words of Pope John Paul burn as brightly today. Never, ever give up hope. Never doubt. Never tire. Never become discouraged. Be not afraid. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire, will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principle, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all, and may God defend our freedom, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Warsaw Royal Castle in Poland, with the Polish Prime Minister and Ukrainian Foreign Minister among those in attendance. If you're just joining us now, I'm here in the studio with our reporter, William Glucroft. William, this was framed very much as a battle between democracy and autocracy. I just want to start by getting your first impressions from this speech from Biden.
Well, I just want to quickly begin at the end, where it's always hard because Joe Biden sometimes lets things slip out in half sentences, but he said at the end, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, is what I heard, which I can only assume is a reference to Vladimir Putin, which that seems like a very strong statement about American policy or Biden's policy towards the future of Putin in power in Russia. I think there's a lot more to unpack in that one, in just that sentence, but there's much more to talk about. It's notable that he started with this sentence, "Be not afraid." Referencing Pope John Paul. Poland is a very deeply Catholic country. They're very proud. There's a lot of pride still of Pope John Paul's becoming the Pope, right?
He brought that up at the beginning and the end.
He brought it in the beginning and the end. He bookended the speech with it, also with a lot of Cold War references, because Pope John Paul was part of this liberation movement, was part of confronting Soviet authoritarianism and trying to bring freedom back to Poland and beyond. And it reminded me of his State of the Union a few weeks ago, where Joe Biden kind of whispered into the microphone, "It will be okay." And I think we're in a very dark moment right now, where you have Vladimir Putin hinting about nuclear weapons, not even hinting, quite clearly talking about nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and not just the war, but with climate change. There's a lot of existential threats that seem to be converging right now, and there's understandably a lot of fear. And you're seeing Joe Biden in speeches like this and at the State of the Union trying to play the role of the commander in calming, right? Trying to calm people down, trying to show not just force in a military sense, but force that he has things under control, that the United States, as a leader of the West, as a leader of democracies, has things under control. To try to bring some ease. And I think this "be not afraid" comment that was at the top and the bottom of his speech was very much in that line, to try to ease some very understandable anxieties right now.
A call for unity there. I mean, he also said in the speech that NATO is more united now than it has ever been. As you've mentioned, plenty of Cold War references to the Berlin Wall, among other things. But as the Ukrainians, so many in attendance for this speech in Poland, they're looking at what he said. What do you think they are going to make of his comments in terms of practical terms in his support?
Well, he said, "We stand with you." I think maybe from Zelensky's point of view, maybe we stand slightly behind you. Zelensky has come out saying he's disappointed in NATO support. He's disappointed in U.S. support, thankful for what there is, what has been given, and Biden went through a list of all the money, all the arms, of all the humanitarian assistance. He went through a long list of what the U.S. and European allies have provided. Ukrainians have made no secret that they don't think it's enough. They've been calling for a no-fly zone. They've been calling, as have some European countries like Poland, calling for a peacekeeping mission under NATO or international command, whatever that might mean. I think international basically means the West at this point.
Let's just clarify, why has Biden been reluctant to do that?
And very reluctantly, because it would almost surely spark a direct confrontation with Russia, as some military analysts and retired military officers have been talking about. Right now, with an active war going on in Ukraine, it's not a peacekeeping mission, it's a peace-enforcing mission. That's a very different mission. And a no-fly zone also means not only attacking Russian planes and downing missiles over Ukrainian airspace. It would mean attacking Russian assets in Russia, because of course Russia can control airspace from its own territory with long-range missiles and radar installations and that kind of thing. And we should remember, we're currently at this time of year in 1999, NATO began its bombing campaign of former Yugoslavia. To dislodge what, by that point, and in comparison, was a rather decrepit and dying dictatorship as Slobodan Milosevic. And that was a 78-day air campaign. That was not easy. There were losses. It took a long time for NATO to achieve its tactical goals. So we should not underestimate how difficult enforcing a no-fly zone or any kind of more direct military intervention would be. And of course, Russia, for all of its tactical mistakes and surprisingly weak military action, is still much more powerful than Slobodan Milosevic was. So just to kind of put things in perspective there, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, has said it is our job to support Ukraine, but it is also our job to make sure this doesn't escalate and spiral even further. We are talking about nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And those things are very, very serious that we should take into account. And this has been the obvious reluctance. Just as on the European side, you've had an obvious reluctance to going harder on energy embargoes and sanctions against gas companies and cutting off payments to those kinds of things, because it would presumably very, very, very much harm European economies, put people en masse out of work, and it would really lead to a global crisis.
I want to ask you more about this Cold War vision that we saw in this speech. Biden said the battle for democracy did not end with the Cold War. He has accused Russia of, quote, strangling democracy, and says that it is a state bent on violence and on lies. Those are tough words. Do you think Putin is listening?
I'm sure he's listening. Whether he cares or not is another question. And of course, he'll hear what he wants to hear. I mean, Putin has a track record of poisoning his enemies, of meddling in the elections of his neighbors, of invading some of his neighbors, Georgia in 2008, and of course, Ukraine the first time around in 2014, albeit in a more indirect, kind of covert, secretive way. So Putin has a long history of doing this. And I find the Cold War comparisons interesting. The comparisons are obvious why they're there. I think in a certain way we're actually in more dangerous territory now. In the Cold War, there were two equally matched sides, two ideologies that had self-preservation in mind. There were arms control treaties and arms control in place. There were hotlines in place to keep things from boiling over, to make sure that there were no misunderstandings in terms of military maneuvers and these kinds of things. Most of that infrastructure is gone. So the chances of missteps, misunderstandings is very, very great, especially if we hear from Vladimir Putin's side, almost in some of his addresses, looking for an excuse to escalate, looking for an excuse to do more, as we've been seeing with these arms convoys coming in from Europe into Ukraine to support Ukrainian forces, may be seen as a threat itself, just as one example.
All right, William Glucroft, I want to thank you so much for coming into the studio to help us analyze this speech from Biden in Warsaw. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to turn now to a developing story from western Ukraine. Officials in Lviv say missile strikes have hit a fuel storage facility, which is now burning after reports of 3 powerful explosions. Lviv is located around 70 kilometers from the Polish border and has been seen as something of a safe haven for those fleeing the Russian invasion of the eastern, northern, and southern parts of Ukraine. After the blasts, you can see black smoke was rising above the city. 5 people are reported injured. So Ukraine has now seen a month of fighting that has left thousands dead and forced more than 10 million people to flee their homes. Now Moscow has said it is shifting its focus to Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. While the Kremlin claims it has largely successfully completed the first phase of what it calls its military operation, analysts say it could be a sign Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to save face after failing to subdue Ukraine or capture its capital, Kyiv. But as Moscow changes focus, the human suffering from its invasion shows no sign of abating.
Signs of spring greeted Kyiv on Saturday. As Ukraine shakes off its winter and enters a new phase of war. There may be a change in strategy after Russian defeats. But there's little respite for those on the front lines of battle. Many are visibly exhausted but steadfast in their determination to stay. Putin came, as you can see, he says. Our children and grandchildren are dying. I'm 62. I can't leave this place. I'll stay here. If need be, I will die here. But I will not give them Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have recaptured areas on the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv. Still, lives continue to be destroyed. At this hospital in Kharkiv, the wounded continue to arrive as Ukrainian forces come under heavy fire. In Mariupol, the damage inflicted by Russian bombs is clear. Unfortunately, nothing remains of Mariupol, and they're bombing it with savage weapons. This last week there have been explosions like I've never heard before. They hit residential areas with rockets. Hundreds continue to flee Mariupol, saying goodbye to their decimated city and to those who must stay behind.
You're watching DW News. Before we go, let's get a recap of our main story. On his second day in Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden has delivered a speech on the war against Ukraine. He invoked both Pope John Paul II and Lech Walesa and their fight against Russian-led Soviet domination of Poland and Eastern Europe to denounce President Putin's aggression against Ukraine. And there are reports of injuries after multiple airstrikes on the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. 3 powerful explosions were heard there, and black smoke was seen rising above the city. Local officials say the strikes hit a fuel storage facility. You're watching DW News live from Berlin. I'll be back in just a moment with our continuing coverage of the war in Ukraine, so don't go away. Do remember you can find more on our website. That's dw.com. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. For me and the team working behind the scenes, thanks so much for joining us.
Australia's roadmap to recovery. What the make or break budget means for the government, the country, and for you. From 7:30, the Treasurer's speech, then all the interviews and expert analysis in the ABC News Budget Special. Budget Night 2022, Tuesday, ABC TV, iView, radio, and online.
What is the effect of telling and hearing diverse stories? The mood, obviously, of Ukrainians has been changing kind of dramatically.
The world needs to act now.
Houses and locations that have never flooded before are flooding.
Get a different perspective.
Look at this panel. This is a dream come true, this panel.
On the stories of the day.
I found the last 10 minutes of this show pretty extraordinary.
Just stand there and do that. It all counts.
The Drum, weeknights on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Economic growth family had never lost a live performance.
Hello and welcome. I'm Mariam Saab with the top stories on ABC News. US President Joe Biden has held talks with his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda in Warsaw. It comes as Russia launches fresh missile strikes in Ukraine. Military targets in the western and central regions of the country have reportedly been hit. Veterans Affairs Minister Andrew Gee has launched a stunning attack on the Morrison government, revealing that he was on the cusp of announcing his resignation from cabinet over the budget. The federal government will provide $96 million for veteran affairs in the upcoming budget. Mr. Gee says the money was only allocated after he threatened to walk away. A 21-year-old woman has died in a suspected domestic violence-related murder in Newcastle in the New South Wales Hunter region. Police arrived at the Mayfield apartment block on Friday to find a horrendous scene. After receiving reports, a man had broken into the woman's home. Her ex-partner is being held in custody but has not been charged. And the music world is in mourning following the death of Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins. Hawkins died while on tour with the band in South America. Those are the latest stories from ABC News.
What's empathy training and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs.
Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
We're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight, and joining me on the panel, CEO and founder of Oz Harvest, Ronnie Khan, President of the Australian Medical Association, Omar Khorshid, in Hamilton in Western Victoria, Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Dan Tehan, Shadow Minister for the Environment and Water, Terry Butler, and economist and CEO of the Committee for Economic Development, Melinda Salento. Great to have you all in the room as well tonight.
Hi. We all love our coffee here in wonderful Melbourne. The story is coffee is about to get really, really, really expensive. As coffee is a cornerstone of the hospitality industry, will this damage our economic recovery?
Gosh, petrol, now coffee, where will it end? Look, I'm sure for many who can't afford coffee can be a luxury, a takeaway coffee, but I think Australios indicates there this is also a jobs creator. If people stop buying coffee, this becomes a bigger issue. Melinda, let me come to you first on this. What would happen if coffee hit, as some have suggested, $7 a cup?
Well, look, I have to say that's a crisis here in Melbourne. We all know it. I think it would be pretty serious for all of us, and we'd be thinking about all the things we'd have to substitute so that we could still get our $9 cup of coffee first thing in the morning. So
$9. It's already gone up since I asked the question.
Well, there we go. Inflation already. But I think that's the critical thing. We all know it's pretty hard to substitute coffee. So I'm going to be getting rid of a whole bunch of other stuff to make sure that I can afford the heart starter in the morning.
But it is symbolic of what's happening right across the board. How serious is this cost of living pinch right now?
Oh, look, I think for most of you in the audience, anyone who's going shopping on a regular basis has noticed how prices are increasing and what you're being asked to pay for when you go to click pay and hit your card. So it is a really significant issue. There's clearly some prices of goods and things like fuel that we've seen a really significant spike, and what people are trying to figure out is that temporary or is it going to be sustained and flow through? But I think the short...
Is there an answer to that? Is that clear?
Look, I think the short answer is that inflation is going to be higher than what we've seen for a while, and it's going to be higher for longer. So how high, I think, is the question that everyone's, grappling with.
But we need to get used to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Ronnie, what are you noticing at Oz Harvest?
Well, the challenge is that vulnerable people get hit first and get hit the hardest. And we're already seeing that. 1 in 6 Australians currently suffer from food insecurity. I mean, that is according to the Food Bank Hunger Report. So that is horrendous. These people are already having to make choices around rent, around shopping, and around medical supplies. Now it's fuel, and it's about choosing what do they give up on. And so this is going to be an enormous crisis, an enormous challenge.
Dan Tehan, let me ask you, in your electorate where you are, what's the biggest cost of living pressure or concern that people raise with you?
The biggest would be around fuel, David. They realise that since the illegal and immoral invasion by Russia of Ukraine, we've seen a big spike in the fuel price. And given the distances that people need to drive, whether it's to get to work, whether it's to take kids to sport on the weekend, that would be the biggest impact that the inflation's having in regional and rural areas.
So what do you hope the budget on Tuesday will do about it?
Look, the budget obviously will look at addressing cost of living issues. We're absolutely aware that's one of the pressures on household budgets. It would also make sure that we can continue to drive a strong economy, continue to provide employment, because obviously having everyone in a job helps to deal with these cost of living pressures. So we'll want to focus on that as well. And a strong economy also enables us to provide the services, whether it be the health services, the education services.
We'll come to that. But just on sure. Fuel, you've nominated as the biggest issue in your electorate when it comes to cost of living. Do you want to cut in fuel excise?
Well, look, the budget will be delivered on next Tuesday by the Treasurer.
Thought you might say that.
I'm not going to steal his thunder in any way. He's a good friend of mine, and I don't want to ruin that friendship. But look, we're absolutely aware that cost of living is something that we've got to deal with. Obviously, with what we've done over the last 2 years, it's been a key focus. It's why we've provided over $30 billion worth of tax cuts, $10 billion per annum into childcare, driven electricity prices down by 8% over the last 2 years. So
I thought you might say all that as well.
So a focus of the government.
Okay, sorry, Omar, you were just.
I was just going to suggest there's another obvious solution, Dan, to the impact on families of high fuel prices, and that's to break that reliance on fuel. And I guess as an owner of an electric vehicle for the last 4 years, I'm lucky enough to be able to afford one. But I know that is just not available for so many Australians. And, is there going to be anything in the budget that's going to make electric vehicles more accessible to more Australians so that we can break our reliance on these increasingly expensive fossil fuels and, of course, deal with this, it's not impending anymore, is it? It's a right here, right now reality of climate change.
That's a pretty good question, Dan.
It is a good question, and it's one that we do have to deal with. We've got to deal with here and now, and the here and now, especially out in regional and rural Australia, is the majority of people will drive petrol cars or they'll drive diesel cars. So we've got to take that into account, but we've also got to look at what's happening as more and more people do purchase electric vehicles.
But you can change the policy settings, Dan, to increase the take-up of EVs is the point. Not to speak for the doctor, but you can change the policy settings to have the take-up of Terry, you've got to admit that they won't ruin the weekend first, though, of course, mate.
OK, let's just finish the answer there,
Terry,
Minister.
Terry, let's have a deal. I won't interrupt you. Let's not you interrupt me. And I think then we'll have a very good conversation. I'm happy for you to have your turn when it's your turn.
I'm not going to be party to any deal. I'll keep interrupting. Sorry, finish that answer there.
You can keep interrupting, David, but I just feel finish the response because I think it's a very important question and one I'd like to focus on, because if you come down to Western Victoria and go to Deakin University, their Warrnambool campus, the government has invested in very important research there to us to be able to drive hydrogen when it comes to buses, when it comes to trucks, because in regional and rural Australia, long-haul transport is absolutely key to how we transition. And the federal government is investing heavily in that so that we can make sure when it comes to buses and trucks, they can be powered on hydrogen. And we've got the workforce to be able to force it. If you look at what we're doing at Portland Aluminium, the biggest user
we're getting a bit away from the electric vehicles question.
We're looking at how we can power that by hydrogen. So.
OK, we're just getting a little bit away from the question from Omar Khorshid was about subsidies for electric vehicles. Terry Butler, what do you think the government should be doing about either fuel prices or coffee prices? What should they be doing?
Well, look, you can't have a meaningful discussion about cost of living unless you acknowledge that wages have flatlined in this country for far too long. We have to address the fact that wages are languishing. That's absolutely crucial. If you want to talk about costs going up, it seems like everything is going up except people's wages. So we have to address that question.
We'll come to wages a little later,
but you can't separate
these
the two,
prices,
David,
is there anything government can do about these prices?
What you can do about EVs, as has been pointed out, is you can change the policy settings to increase the take-up of them. And we've got policies to do that. The Queensland government has policies to do that. It's happening around the country. Most governments are doing it. This government has a prejudice against electric vehicles for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. And before the last election, they were telling us that we're going to ruin the weekend by promoting them. I mean, this is the sort of nonsense that we have passing for public policy in this country. David, if we could come back to the cost of living pressure, the question around, we've picked a couple of things. We've talked about price increases. There are definitely some temporary aspects to this, which I think is why we're having conversations around temporary measures in the budget. But I think that whether it's price increases or whether it's interest rate increases, which we're going to see, household budgets are going to be under more pressure than they have been for a while. One of the things that you see always when interest rates increase, when price pressures increase, is the second income earner comes in. So people either look for a job when they haven't as a second income earner in the family, or they look to work more hours. The thing that can't be escaped here is the need to look at childcare again. I know there were measures in the last budget, but particularly for low-income households, childcare is a huge cost. It's going to be something that they're looking at, not just this week, next month, next year. It's got to be something that's looked at.
I'm a 61-year-old woman with a teenage son. I have my own health issues. I don't own a house and I don't have any superannuation. I don't have investments, but I don't have credit cards or debt either. With rising costs of food and rent, I can see my future living in my only asset, which is a 1974 Combi, right? That's my future, full-time, and passing my youngest child onto his older siblings to be their responsibility. For the past few months, my family and I have had terrible food insecurity just because the fridge broke. Right? Nothing, not major, but the fridge broke down. And we were using ice for weeks. So we have been living on charity food for quite a few months. When my fortnightly disability support pension comes into my account, within about 12 hours, everything is spent on bills. I'll be lucky to have $10 left for a travel card for the week. Today again, Thursday, we went and got another load of food from a charity to support us for the week. I'm not sure I can actually see this cycle that my family is in ending anytime soon. So my question is, why does the government think one-off payments actually help me and others? When is the government going to talk about people like me and raise the rate of the disability support pension so I can live above the poverty line?
Bridget, thank you. And Dan Turner, we'll come to you in a moment. But Ronnie, how familiar is that sort of story?
It's the story that I hear every single day. It's the demographic that we deal with. A one-off payment. During the pandemic, we saw what happened with JobKeeper. During the time that JobKeeper was paid, people could afford or were managing their budgets a little bit better. After March, when those JobKeeper stopped, we had more people coming to us, more demand, and the exact situation reverted. And it's even worse now because of the cost of living. This week, I was going to share a story about a nurse, a single mother, who literally had to make a choice about, she wanted to go to work. She had to make a choice. To go to work, she has to put her child into childcare. In order to put her child into childcare, she then had to make a choice. She couldn't drive her car to work because she couldn't pay for fuel, or she had to buy food. This is the reality in this country, this generous, abundant, extraordinary country.
So Dan Turner...
Sorry, but can I just tell you something as well on this point? I think we also have to draw in the issue of not just wages but job insecurity when we talk about cost of living pressures and people facing homelessness. And I say this because during our floods a few weeks ago, we ran a barbecue for people who'd been displaced by the flooding, and a young man told me that he lived in his car. During the floods, the rain bomb that we had. He had nowhere safe to even park it. His car was, the windows didn't work, he got soaked. But the thing that really stayed with me is the fact that he had a job. He was a delivery driver and he couldn't get enough shifts. And so we have in this country someone who's working in employment and
64% of people who come to us for support have got jobs. They just cannot afford to live on the wages that they are getting.
Let me come back though to Bridget's question, Terry Butler. Bridget's saying, what about the disability support pension? Should that be increased?
Look, I think that the disability support pension has been, frankly, it's been getting more and more difficult to even get the disability support pension. I don't know if that's been your experience, but my office helps people all the time who struggled to get the disability support pension. So let me just say that point, David, because it is important. There's been a deliberate policy by this government to try to shift people off the disability support pension. The former Social Security Minister, Christian Porter, spoke about that at the Press Club some years ago, was very proud of getting people off the disability support pension. But of course, the difficulty with that approach is that it's only a good thing to reduce reliance on the disability support pension if you're reducing need.
Okay, but Bridget's question is about whether that can be increased. Should it be increased?
And so the question on the amount of money, we have to look at, in this country, with the cost of living pressures that we're under, all of the different components of cost of living. As I said, incomes is definitely one of them. It's a really important question. Of course, we have to look at that in the context of broader government priorities, broader decision-making in relation to spending, but we have to think about childcare, as Melinda said, power prices, house prices, the lack of social and affordable housing in this country, something that needs to be addressed as well. All of these different items when it comes to cost of living, and of course the prices of food, the disruption of the supply chains and the increased reliance on food banks, charities, etc. We have to look at all of these things in a comprehensive way.
Let me come to you, Dan T, on this, because Bridget's other point is a one-off payment isn't by its nature going to fix a long-term permanent problem, is it?
Well, I mean, without knowing Bridget's full circumstances, it's hard to tell that. I don't know how old her son is, etc. But everything that this government has tried to do is to make sure that we've got people through the pandemic, and now to make sure that we've got a strong economy as we come out of this pandemic, so we can continue to make the payments that we need to make to support people who are dealing with these cost of living pressures. And the best thing that we can do is try and get as many people into work as we possibly can and try to get them as many hours as we possibly can. And the fact that we've got an unemployment rate now at 4%, we've got youth unemployment rate at its lowest level since 1971. The forecast is that unemployment rate will go to below 4%. That means that there's going to be more and more opportunities there for more and more people to get work. And that means
but not with respect,
so that we can provide
sorry to interrupt,
support.
But I was just going to say, with respect, not someone like Bridget who's shaking her head here in the studio. The question is about the disability support pension.
David, can I...
Let me just quickly get an answer from you, Dan T. And is there a case, do you think, for increasing it?
Look, it does increase. It gets indexed every year, and we'll continue to do that. But what
I'm talking about a real increase above
sure
inflation to help someone like Bridget.
Well, what we want to do is make sure that we can make other payments to assist her. We want to make sure that the opportunities are there for her son to be able to get an apprenticeship, to get the skills and training that he will need, and to make sure that there's employment for him when he leaves schools. That's the best thing that we can do, and that's why we're so focused on a strong economy. That's why coming out of this pandemic, the fact that we've got unemployment now down to 4% is quite remarkable when you think about what we were having forecast when we headed into this pandemic. We've got a situation now where the biggest issue that's raised with me by whether it be farmers or businesses in my electorate is that they need more people to be working more hours. So we're in that situation where we can provide those opportunities for people to be able to improve their wages and to be able to help deal with the cost of living.
I appreciate that point. And we've heard that point. Sorry, Melinda, you just wanted to jump in.
Just a couple of things. Firstly, as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Australia committed to halving the rate of poverty in Australia in 2015 by 2025. We've gone nowhere. it's clear that's because things like income support payments are not sufficient. There has been a huge campaign on raising the rate of these payments, supported by the Business Council of Australia, CEDA, ACOS, the former Prime Minister John Howard, Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics. I mean, the evidence is compelling, and everyone agrees, but we don't get it to happen. And the other point to make, though, is that we talk about the unemployment rate. There are 560,000 people who are unemployed at the moment. There are 930,000 people on JobSeeker. Right? So, yes, the unemployment rate is low, but there are a whole bunch of people
who are still on that JobSeeker.
Who are still not getting sufficient income.
I think this is a question about what kind of country we want to be. And I just keep going back to the lessons from COVID. And we learned in COVID that we could do things differently. We could, we could even see a Conservative government throw money around like it was free. We could see, we saw that we were willing to take sacrifices in order to look after the health of other people. We all felt pretty safe from COVID, at least I did, but I wanted to make those sacrifices to help the other people, the vulnerable people. And I think, we've seen it with, of course, the increase in JobKeeper, JobSeeker, and we just need to go forward. And if you ask Australians, are they willing to forego their tax cut so that we're not seeing somebody who's in employment, they're not a dole bludger, they're in employment, but they're living out of the back of their car. Most Australians are going to say yes to that. They will forego their tax cut and they will be very happy as long as they can trust the government to spend the money, and that's a big question. But if they know that money is going to go into proper supports, into disability support pensions, into JobKeeper, JobSeeker, etc., of course into our health system, into public hospitals, into primary care, these are important things that make us proud to be Australian, because we know that everybody has access to these minimum services.
Hello, panel. My question is, what is the right level of immigration to allow into this country? What is the balance between pursuing economic growth versus controlling cost of living pressures for our current residents?
Melinda.
Well, the first thing I'd say is we haven't had much immigration for the last couple of years, and we still have house prices going up and we still have cost prices going up. So there's a little bit more nuance to this, I think. Look, David, let me tell you a bit about the conversations I'm having with business at the moment. And what we're hearing is that skill shortages are really a real challenge for them.
The business is desperate to bring in more skilled migrants, right?
Yeah, well, what they're talking about is the fact that the investment decisions that they're making are being influenced by whether or not they think they can get the skills they need. And if I give you one example, businesses who accelerated their digitisation during COVID for all the right reasons now want to embed those technologies, they want to be able to leverage those, and they're not being able to access the skills that they need. I'm also talking to large businesses that run global businesses. They're worried that when borders open, that the workers that they have that want to pursue opportunities overseas are actually going to leave faster than they can get people in. So it's a really big issue. We found that in our own members that we surveyed, and we think it's something that really needs to be addressed.
So let's hear from, Terry Butler, you first. Would Labor increase the skilled migration intake?
Yeah, look, I think what's interesting out of the COVID international borders issues has been how much difficulty it's caused. Melinda's said that we've still seen all of the inflation, notwithstanding the sharp decrease in immigration, but there's been also some very obvious difficulties arising from the fact that people can't necessarily rely on immigration and short-term skilled migration in the way that they used to be able to, and that's happened throughout the labour market. And so because there's just fewer people coming in with those specific skills that there's shortages for, that's also having a knock-on effect in all sorts of occupations. So I'd say that firstly, I think with respect to the questioner, it's not as simple as a kind of a binary between increasing immigration on the one hand or having less pressure on the other.
Have you worked out what Labor would do?
Look, I think that, obviously I'll defer to Christina and Andrew on this, but from my perspective, as someone who represents a really multicultural community, who represents a community that I think is really open to immigration, and also I might just add a community where there is a lot of student accommodation, and we've really felt the absence of international students on those visas. I think Australians are really open to more immigration. I think they want to see...
Sounds like you would welcome an increase.
Look, what I would welcome is a national debate where we recognise that immigration has different nuances, different consequences and different approaches. And what
yes?
we should do is get the right setting for Australia.
I know you want to
Just say yes. Just say yes.
Is immigration
David
is positive?
hates it when I don't give him a simple answer.
All right, okay. Dan T, what about you? Should it be increased, skilled migration?
Well, the first thing, David, is we've got to make sure that we keep investing in apprenticeships, in skills and training to make sure that we've got as many Australians in work as we possibly can. Then what we've got to do is make sure that we target the skilled migration that comes into the country so that it drives employment further. So where there are skills that we need that we will know will expand businesses, create more jobs and more opportunities, that's where we really need to be focusing in on it.
I think we all get that. The question is, should it be increased further from where it is?
Well, at the moment, it's at 160,000. We've got to make sure that we're bringing in the right people with the right skills that's going to lead to us growing the economy, plus doing the investment in the right place. We also have to look at opportunities like we did with the UK Free Trade Agreement that we negotiated, where we were able to, with the United Kingdom, agree that young people would be able to move between Australia and the United Kingdom for 3 years if they're under 35 to either work or study. So there's opportunities like that which will also enhance opportunity for young people in Australia and young people in Britain. So they're the types of opportunities that we want to be looking for as we seek to make sure that we maximise employment here in Australia.
A nuanced answer as well. Let me just ask you, both of our politicians here tonight, about the story we heard today that the government has finally signed the deal with New Zealand to resettle a total of 450 refugees who've been in offshore detention to New Zealand, 150 a year for the next 3 years. Dan Tehan, why didn't this happen 9 years ago?
Well, David, obviously we've got to negotiate these things. We've got to negotiate them in the right way, because the last thing you want to see is that... Well, David, what we've got to do is make sure that you get the arrangements absolutely right, because the last thing we want to see is a return to the boats coming, the deaths at sea that we saw, 1,200 people died. None of us want to see that. And so what we've made sure is that with all the arrangements that we've entered into, whether it was what we entered into with the Obama administration in the US, whether it's what we've done here with New Zealand, is to make sure that those settings are right and it's not going to lead to that illegal people smuggling.
Well, this is the issue, because the Prime Minister repeatedly said he was opposed to this deal with New Zealand, and he said that he didn't flip-flop on this. So what has changed? Has it got anything to do with the fact we're now on the cusp of an election and you're under pressure in those inner city seats from progressive independents?
No, it's got to do with being able to come to an arrangement where we know that it will keep our borders secure, and that's what we've done. It's why we entered into the arrangement that we did with the Obama administration. What we've been able to do is to make sure that we've put a stop to the illegal boat arrivals, and we've done that by making sure that whatever we've done, the arrangements we've entered into, have sent a very clear signal that there is no way that the boat should start again, and that will continue to be the approach that we're taking, because none of us want to see a return to what we saw historically under the previous Labor administration.
Well, Terry Butler, this won't cover all of those still in detention 9 years on. Should the rest of them be released and allowed to come to Australia if they can't go to New Zealand under this deal?
Well, David, before I answer your question, let me say that was utter nonsense from Dan, with respect. It was utter nonsense. In fact, what's happened is that people have lost years of their life because this government refused to accept a deal that has been on the table from New Zealand for years. Peter Dutton has, throughout that entire time, as has Scott Morrison, been making the same sorts of claims that Dan has just made now, that there was some sort of pull factor, that this would start people smuggling if they accepted the New Zealand settlement deal, and that was always nonsense, and it's still nonsense, and I'm surprised that even after the humiliating backdown that we've seen today, I'm surprised that Dan would try to run those lines.
So what about the rest, the rest that aren't covered by this? Should they be let go?
Well, David, I had In my electorate, we had the Kangaroo Point APOD, the alternative place of detention, and it was a disgrace. We had people who were stuck in a hotel for months and months and months. And why were they in Australia? Because they had been medevaced here because they were in desperate need of medical treatment. And instead of caring for those people, this government allowed them to sit there and languish in that hotel. It was a disgrace. And I think, David, that most Australians, and I know that my electorate feels this way, would like to see a much more humane and more sensible approach from government when it comes
release
to
those
asylum
who
seekers and
can't be
refugees.
resettled. Release those who can't be resettled.
David, if someone's not a national security threat or some sort of safety risk, why not release them into the community? Why not have people in the community where they can be safe, where they can be with friends and supporters and loved ones, and where they can actually participate in our society? It's a no-brainer.
That is all we have time for. Thanks to our panel, Ronnie Khan, Omar Khorshid, Dan Tehan, Terry Butler and Melinda Salento. And thanks to those of you here in the audience and at home for sharing your questions. Next week, we're taking the program to Canberra. We'll be live from the ANU's Llewellyn Hall to answer your questions about the all-important budget. I'll be joined by the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, Independent's Jackie Lambie and Zali Stegel, and Editor-at-Large at the Australian newspaper, Paul Kelly. And you can join me on Insiders on Sunday morning ahead of the budget. Until then, good night.
What is the effect of telling and hearing diverse stories? The mood, obviously, of Ukrainians has been changing kind of dramatically.
The world needs to act now.
Houses and locations that have never flooded before are flooding.
Get a different perspective.
Look at this panel. This is a dream come true, this panel.
On the stories of the day.
I found the last 10 minutes of this show pretty extraordinary.
Just stand there and do that. It all counts.
The Drum, weeknights on ABC TV and ABC iView. Well-known Aussies face questions they've never been asked before.
That is a very tricky dilemma.
About things that haven't happened yet.
What if you could live to 150? Would the world be better without lies? No.
If you had a deep fake video of you, are we going to the tape?
Well, there are thousands of gods. How do you know you've chosen the right one?
You would answer that in a light entertainment format.
Tomorrow Tonight starts Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Welcome to 1+1. I'm Kurt Fernley. My guest today is a champion of the sport that they call murder ball. He's a fierce competitor, known for taking no prisoners on the court. But I also know he's a huge softie underneath that hard exterior. I caught up with Riley Batt for a conversation, but first, he roped me into a workout session.
How frequently do you do something like this?
Oh, at the moment, every day. I'm loving it, mate. You know, doing the same training for 2 decades in wheelchair rugby, it's been awesome, but I just want to mix it up, and this new world for me of CrossFit, it's constantly varied, mate. Every workout is different, and it just challenges you. Some days you come in and you look at the board and there's no way I'm going to get through that. Other days it looks easy, but it's not. And I've loved it, absolutely loved it.
How many push-ups are we doing now?
Oh, I reckon do 15 hover ones.
Okay.
All right, let's go. Are you ready? 600. That's good.
I'm going to need a couple of hours to get ready for this interview.
Have a cold gin, how about that?
Riley Batten, welcome to 1+1.
Cheers for having me, mate.
Mate, the intensity that you bring to sport, you bring it to sport and training, but especially when you pull on that green and gold. Where does that come from?
Oh, man, I'm getting goosebumps just even thinking about it now. We represent Australia. You know, throwing that green and gold means so much to me. I make sure when I put that jersey on that it's pride, it's passion, it's a thought of, you know, who supported me on the journey. It's, you know, who's with me. It's my community back here in Port Macquarie. It's all those kind of things. So I take it very serious when I throw that jersey on, that green and gold, and I make sure when I've got it on that I leave nothing in the tank.
You don't leave anything to the tank. When I see you compete, it's terrifying. The person that I see there. You play wheelchair rugby it's one of the most, it is the most violent sport that is in the Paralympic movement. It's called murder ball. What do you love about that?
Yeah, look, I am a little bit two-faced when I play wheelchair rugby. I will admit that. Even my wife has said she would not marry on-court Riley. Because he is a totally different guy. He's
scary.
And I'm not a fan of on-court Riley. I apologise to the referees every time I play because I'm in their face and I'm having goes at them for their calls. And off the court, I'm a totally different person. I feel really guilty about it and feel really bad. So, yes, I'm a bit two-faced, mate, when it comes to wheelchair rugby. But I think just what gets me is that pride. It's the competitive nature. It's the drive to win. I just want to win it, at all costs. And I really enjoy playing for Australia. I really enjoy playing wheelchair rugby. And, who doesn't want to see a sport where it's encouraged to knock anyone else, guys in wheelchairs out of wheelchairs and knock them on the floor. Like, I know, I love that.
When you describe murder ball, I see it's like 4 sports rolled into one, thrown into a wheelchair, and then bash each other up. How do you describe it?
Oh, look, let's simplify it, mate. It's dodge 'em cars on a basketball court. It's knock as many blokes as you can and females out of wheelchairs as possible and score more points than the other team.
What goes through your mind when you do cross that line onto the field of play?
A lot of nerves, and that will probably shock a lot of people because I've now played 313 games for Australia, but I think without nerves, you don't care of the result. And for me, I embrace those nerves and use them as a driving factor to do the best and learn to turn those nerves into that adrenaline. I go through a lot of rituals as well before a game, Kurt. I'm a bit weird. I've got a lot of superstitions. You know a little bit about my superstitions. I've got some lucky underwear that I wear. I've got some 4-leaf clovers in my wallet, lucky shoes under my wheelchair that have motivational quotes, and I also have to be the last person on the field to play. And that's just weird superstitions, but it's also routine, and that just helps me. Just helps me every game.
The lucky Batman jocks. Don't just throw the lucky jocks out there. I had the same lucky pair of jocks since the first medal that I won in Athens. Rode them all the way through. So I completely understand. It's a superpower.
Yeah, but I wash mine, Kurt. That's the difference.
You wash the luck out of it? How do they remain lucky?
It's a bit weird when I say to people I've got lucky underwear and I've had them since, I think, Beijing 2008, and everyone's like, that's gross, man. But they don't realise, or for myself, I'm not sure about you, you probably wear yours every day, but for me... I've only worn them probably 6 times in my life, so they're probably my freshest pair of undies, even though they're the oldest. But yes, I am weird like this, mate, but I've got some superhero undies that I wear in different, pool games, semi-final games, and the Batman undies come out in the final. So they've been good to me so far, very good.
The Riley that I know is very different to that crazy, intense human that's wearing the green and gold. Where did that competitor come from?
Yeah. The competitor, I guess I could thank my dad and my pop for that. My dad is a huge competitor and always has been. He's mid-60s now and he's still ripped as, very fit and still loves to compete. But, growing up, he did all sports. He actually won an event here in Port Macquarie called the King of Sports, what mixed all different sports into one. And that's just who he was, a competitor. And I remember growing up, you know, playing, say, classic catches in the backyard or even jumping into the pool doing it or whatever we did, he was still competing against me. You know, he's you know, young disabled son who had no chance. But I think that's just, it made me who I am. I wanted to be a competitor and I always wanted to strive for my best, and it doesn't matter who I'm up against. So I got to thank him for that, but I also got to thank my pop as well. My pop was a huge influence in my life, and you know, was one who pushed my boundaries from a young age. You know, as a 3-year-old, he bought me my first ever quad bike, and my parents sort of looked at him like, well, why are you buying, you know, our kid with, you know, no legs, missing fingers, a motorbike? Like, how's he going to ride it? But you know, I managed to do it, and it was probably one of the best things that's ever happened in my life. Getting pushed outside my comfort zone like that has made, I guess, me a huge competitor in life. But yeah, I'm very thankful for my parents and my grandparents.
What did that 4x4, what did that motorbike bring into your life? Because you still ride it, you're still pretty out there on what you're doing it. What did that give to a 3-year-old kid? Because disability can get in the road of a lot of stuff. It seems that meant something to you.
I think for me, you know, growing up with a disability, look, my younger years, I guess I didn't really realise my disability, but there was something subconsciously that was sitting there that I just couldn't do what my mates were doing. You know, they're all starting to ride a push bike at 3 or 4 years old, and motorbikes. You know, a lot of my friends were riding motorbikes at 3 or 4 years old, and I could have just not done that and missed out on that whole part of my life. But to ride that quad bike as a 3-year-old and feel like a normal boy up against all my friends was a huge aspect in my life. And I think it showed to my parents, my grandparents, myself, that I am so much more able than, I guess, we thought I was going to be, you know, growing up.
Your disability can be complicated. It can be complicated not just for you, but it can be complicated for your family. Tell me some stories about how your family adapted to life as, you know, having a kid with a disability.
So when Mum conceived me, the scan showed that I was a perfectly healthy, you know, boy. When I entered the world, it was a huge shock for my grandparents and my parents who were there, that I was missing legs and missing a few fingers in each hand. And I can't imagine how tough that would have been for them. But how they adapted and how they accepted me for who I am and took that challenge on, I can't thank them enough. They didn't wrap me in cotton wool. They let me do anything that any other normal boy did. I remember as probably a 4-year-old, I've got vivid memories of it. I used to love swimming down at the ocean. And I remember Dad used to pick me up, you know, after work, put me in his work ute, would go down the beach, he'd throw me on his back and take me down to the water to swim. This day, he decided to put me on his back and take me down to the beach, but he put me on the soft sand at the start of the beach. And I remember chucking the world's biggest tantrum, as you do as a 4-year-old. And I just wanted to get down to the water. I wanted to go for a swim. And Dad said, oh, well, there you go. There's the ocean. And it was low tide, so it was a fair way to go. But Dad persisted to, you know, shuffle me along while I'm chucking a tantrum to make my own way there. Meanwhile, there's, you know, families on that beach who are looking at my dad going, what are you doing, mate? Pick your poor disabled son up and take him for a swim. That's all he wants to do. And that must have been really tricky for him to swallow that and to push me to go down to the beach, even with people looking at him as a, you know, not the best father in the world. But, you know, it was a lesson learnt for me that, you know, you can achieve anything and you know, you are more able than you think you are. So, you know, I got myself down to the water and had a swim and crawled back up, and that was the end of the tantrums. You know, I learnt that I can crawl just as far as anyone can walk. And it's lessons like that that I'm so thankful for in life.
You didn't use a wheelchair when you were a young kid. Why?
I didn't use a wheelchair, mate, when I was a kid because, to be honest, I thought people in wheelchairs were disabled and I didn't see myself as that.
What did disabled mean to you as a kid?
I guess as a kid you can look at people in wheelchairs as a little bit scary and a little bit different. How totally wrong I was as a kid. You know, I think growing up, I just wanted to be who I was, and that was Riley on a motorbike. That was Riley on a skateboard, and I didn't want to be seen by my peers as someone who's wheelchair bound. Growing up, I thought that was a bad thing. You know, looking at someone in a wheelchair now, I do not think that at all. You know, people in wheelchairs are completely normal people, and to be honest, I think sometimes, you know, have a stronger willpower than able-bodied people. And I, to be honest, wish I got in a wheelchair at an earlier age. I think it would have been so much easier for me getting around as a kid, but I also think it would have been a lot better for me socially than Riley, who was cutting around school on a skateboard.
So you got around on a skateboard?
So for me, my life growing up was prosthetic legs as a young kid, but with my legs being so short, I really struggled to walk on them. And my friends at school, I remember in kindergarten, grade 1, used to throw their foot out to trip me over as a joke. But little do they know, it was pretty hard to get back up on these legs that I was trying to learn how to walk on. From there,
I can't imagine seeing you walking around. It's like,
yeah, it's something I do want to get back into, getting into some prosthetic legs. But the wheelchair's just, it's me now, and it's part of me, and I love it. But yeah, from those prosthetic legs, it was just a bit tricky as a kid, trying to keep up on the schoolyard, running around with your friends. I just couldn't do it. So I used to crawl around, but I just couldn't keep up like that either. So the next mode of transport for me was a skateboard. I used to skate down to the oval and play soccer and footy and cricket and, all those kind of sports with my friends, but I just still could not keep up with my friends. And then I guess the sport of wheelchair rugby fell in my lap.
How did you get involved in wheelchair rugby?
It was a school sport, grade 6. It was at a time where I was cruising around school on a skateboard, was putting on weight, and I didn't really know what to do with my life. I tried to play sport. I wanted to play sport, but I just could never find a sport that suited me. My grandparents said to me, my pop especially said, when I was about probably 9 years old, he said, "You're going to be a Paralympian one day. You just need to find what sport you're going to be a Paralympian in." And I sort of just laughed it off because I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to jump in a wheelchair or whatnot. My parents tried to get me in a wheelchair around the same time, and I said to them, "You can buy me a wheelchair, but there's no chance I'm going to use it. I want to be on a skateboard. That's me." And then grade 6 at school, I didn't get my sport electives in on time. I was away for the day, so I got stuck with the last choice, and that was at the local PCYC, and that was 3 sports involved. There was table tennis, squash, and wheelchair rugby. What's this wheelchair rugby? I'd never heard of it in my life. Went to the PCYC, went to the wheelchair rugby and saw a local Paralympian at the time, Tom Kennedy, who just came off the back of winning a silver at the Sydney 2000 Paralympics. He had about 14 wheelchair rugby chairs there, and all these kids ran to these rugby chairs and started playing. But I sat back, I could see him looking at me. I sat back and I was like, I'm not jumping in one of those, that's defeat, I'm not jumping in a wheelchair, that's embarrassing. So the week went on, I watched all my able-bodied friends, jump in these wheelchairs, bash into each other, have the best time. A week went on and we went on a family holiday to Harrington. So what I usually do is get on my skateboard. At the time I had one with monster truck wheels, so you could go over the gravel, and I remember pushing along the gravel and went down to the soft sand and threw my skateboard in the bushes and crawled down to the surf and swam for an hour. Used to love the surf, love the sand, and crawled back up after exhausting myself for an hour and went to find my skateboard, and it had been stolen. Someone had taken, my skateboard out of the bushes and didn't realise that was my mode of transport. It's like stealing someone's wheelchair. It's just pretty frowned upon. But that moment of my life, I went, maybe you need to get over this issue of the wheelchair and give it a go. You see all your friends loving it. Let's just have a go. So that week at school, I jumped in the wheelchair rugby chair, and I have never been so happy in my life. I felt like I was on the same level playing field as all my friends for the first time in my life. But as you would know, Kurt, crawling around for that many years, you had so much upper body strength, where when I first jumped in the wheelchair, I was quicker than my friends, I was stronger than my friends, and it was an amazing moment in my life. And to overcome that wheelchair and find the sport of wheelchair rugby was probably the best moment of my life.
Like, I grew up crawling around as well and using all sorts of stuff to get about. because the only time I saw wheelchairs was when I went to the hospital and I just saw sick people.
Yeah.
I didn't see disability or people getting around in chairs that were fit and active and healthy and had choice and power in their life. How important is that for a kid figuring out their path with a disability to see strong, active, healthy role models?
Mate, that's a great point. And exactly, growing up, I didn't see anyone else, I guess, who was, athletic or sporty at the time in a wheelchair. Of course there was, athletes in wheelchairs at the time, but I guess it wasn't seen on TV as much. So, yeah, that's what I saw, sick people, I guess, in wheelchairs, and I didn't want to be that person. So I think it's absolutely amazing these days that we see so many, people like yourself, Kurt, who are, presenting on TV. You see, amazing athletes, and people just they don't see the wheelchair. They're seeing the actual person behind the wheelchair.
I often get told that I'm fortunate because I was born in a wheelchair and I didn't have to adjust to life going forward. But in my thought process is that taking the trauma out of the acquiring a disability part, at some point in life, you need to find a place where you are comfortable with who you are and meet the world at that point as you are.
Yeah.
Did you have one of those moments?
I've had, I guess, a few moments like that. But to be honest, mate, I really didn't come out of my shell and accept who I was and be proud of who I was until around the time I met my wife. I was about probably 20 years old. So, yeah, it was obviously, a lot of teenage years there of sort of self-pity and being embarrassed of who I was. And, a lot of people didn't see that. They didn't see that, Riley, because I was playing sport at the time. But I still was, pretty down on myself and still sort of, I guess, worried that what people thought of me. These days, obviously, you still do have a little bit of, sometimes where you're like, oh, what are they going to think of, myself in a wheelchair or of my abilities or whatnot. But I actually I'm proud of who I am. I'm actually proud of, Australia, to be honest, in embracing people with disabilities and treating us as we should be, as normal people. We are normal people at the end of the day. We just have wheels for legs.
Tell me about your wife. How did you meet Crystal?
So I was coming back from an overseas trip, I think the UK, and I was a little bit jet lagged and was training at 4:35 in the morning at the local gym here in Port Macquarie, and she was training at the same time. And I remember when I first met her, I was actually balancing on a Swiss ball. I was balancing for my core work at the time, and I remember her, I'm going to say that she flirted with me first, all right? She decided to come up and pretend to kick me off the ball. And that just sort of drew my attention that, no one's ever done that before, because usually, I guess, people, you see someone in a wheelchair and sometimes they're a little bit over nice, where she just didn't see the wheelchair. She just saw, I guess, me and what I was doing and mucked around like that. So...
You know what? I think that one of the first times I met Sheridan, I fell out of my chair and she laughed. And I was like, I like that one.
We might have to get them two together.
Oh, my God, it's a wild night. How hard was it because of COVID? And I know how much your family support means to you. How hard was it not to have your family be able to leave Australia because of the border restrictions while you were competing in Tokyo?
Yeah, it was tough going to Tokyo knowing that the family weren't going to be there. They mean so much to you as an athlete because they have been on the journey with you. They have sacrificed so much, and they have understood your sacrifices as well. So, I haven't taken my wife on a honeymoon yet. We've been married for almost 6 years and she still hasn't got a honeymoon. We haven't been on a holiday since around 2014. So, I feel pretty bad about that. I'll definitely take her on a honeymoon and a holiday very soon. But, the sacrifices she's made for me to be an athlete is something that I'm very, very thankful of. So, I definitely want to take her to the Paralympics because for us, that's the pinnacle of our sports. The last two Paralympic Games, London and Rio, we had so much success. And in Rio, I pretty much told her to stay home, to stay with the kids. And so I feel like they missed a huge part of my career and I wanted them to come to Tokyo. So when COVID hit and they weren't allowed to go to Tokyo, it definitely hurt. But you know that they're watching on TV and they're proud of, you know, what you've achieved and who you are. And I put all the family's names, you know, the wife and the kids' names on my shoes that are underneath my wheelchair. They're good luck shoes. And when you get into those moments in a game where you just think you cannot give it any more, you touch those shoes, you look at those names, and you think who you were doing this for.
How hard was it with border restrictions as a team sport? You weren't able to play together, the Steelers as a team, for almost 18 months. How challenging was that when you landed in Tokyo?
A lot tougher than we thought it was going to be, to be honest. I think when COVID struck, you know, around March 2020, as a Paralympian, we were scared. Like, we're thinking, are these games going to be cancelled? And it was a pretty scary time. But when they delayed the games for 1 year, I think a sense of relief came over us. And we're just very thankful that they were still considering the games, the Olympics and Paralympics, and that they were going to be on. But as an athlete, it's not every year we get a shot at these, you know, these gold medals. It's every 4 years. And you have to dedicate your life for those 4 years. It's a lot of training. It's not like we come in 6 months before the game and start training. It's 4 years of work and prep for those games. So, you know, in March 2020, we were in our prime, we had the focus, we had our goal sitting there. And to have that delayed a year, as I said, yes, it was a relief, but it also was just very tough to reset for another year of grinding out training sessions, of sacrifice, of just hard work. And it's a lot. A year extra of hard work is a lot. And it started to take its toll. It definitely did. It played on my mind a lot that extra year, but we fought through it. For us, you know, we all live in different states, so with the border restrictions, we couldn't come together as a team. So it was a lot of individual training for us, and being a team sport, you need to gel as a team. And without having gameplay, training camps, over that sort of 18 months to 2 year period, we started to, I guess, our cohesion as a team started to slip away a little bit. And we didn't really realise how much until we got to Tokyo, and it was our first tournament as a team, and we come out against Denmark, who, you know, is a great team, but it's a team that we've beaten by 10, 20 points previously. You know, we come out, we're all feeling individually really good, but we realised that we were very much lacking as a team, that nothing was automative in the head, and you had to think of every play and where everyone was going to be, and it just didn't come automatically, and you felt a little bit lost out there. So it took a few games to get back in the swing of things, and Tokyo was definitely mentally tough to take for us as a team, but looking back on it, Kurt, it was outside of our control. We did everything we possibly could training-wise. We were fit, we were strong, but without that cohesion as a team and that gelling as a team, it's going to be very hard to try to get, you know, the gold medal at the pinnacle of our sport.
I spoke to Crystal, and she did say that there was talk of retirement after London and Rio and Tokyo.
Yeah.
Are we going to see you in Paris, or is there going to be an extended honeymoon coming Christmas year?
I should say extended honeymoon, shouldn't I, if Crystal's watching this? Mate, I love representing Australia. I don't want to be someone who looks back in 10, 20 years and goes, I could have gone to another games, or I could have gone to another 2 games. And that's something that you cannot change. So I sit here now as a 32-year-old. My body is feeling probably the best it ever has. You know, I've had my fair share of injuries, but I'm learning how to adapt better with my body these days. I'm learning so much more about myself. I'm learning my limits. I'm mixing up my training, and I'm feeling really good. And this is the weird sport mentality, and you know this one, Kurt. I'm going, it's only 3 more years.
That's way better than 4.
I go, it's only 3 more years. And then you go, oh, geez, that's like 1,000 sessions. That's a lot of pain. But I'm going to take a couple of months off, I think, and just enjoy my time with people who have supported me. You know, my family, my friends. Being able to just, on a Friday or Saturday afternoon, if my friends crack a beer, be able to have a beer with them, you know, and that's just huge to me. And I want to be able to enjoy this now, but I also want to come back and throw on the green and gold again.
Awesome. Mate, one day you will know, you know? Like, it will pop up and it will tell you that you're done. So I look forward to seeing Riley on the other side of it, but I also look forward to seeing Riley pull on that green and gold again, mate. You might have ruined me, because that session has wrecked me for the next couple of weeks, but Riley Bat, thanks for joining me on 1+1.
Cheers. Thanks, Kurt.
Acquitted for murder.
I've had to spend 12.5 years in prison for something I didn't do.
After revelations of planted evidence.
I would rate this case as one of the most extraordinary cases I've ever been involved in.
And a family still waiting for answers.
We want justice for Stacey.
It's almost like it's all been swept under the carpet now.
Tell me, what happened to my baby sister?
The Cost of Justice on Australian Story. Monday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
The worst possible place for human beings to live in the face of climate change would be Australia.
Future forecast.
It's just far worse than we all expect it's going to be.
Collectively, we have not done enough.
Question is, how bad are we willing to let it get?
The human impact of our climate in crisis.
I'm incredibly angry that so many people died.
The world has to understand that this is a make or break moment.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
This town has just lurched from one disaster to another.
Having your house burned down works really well. You get rid of everything. It's like a big clean out.
Mallacoota needs to advocate for what we want.
We feel we know best about what we need.
You can't leave it to the bureaucracies.
We are having a Mallacoota election.
There'll be no chance that they'll choose me.
The opportunity is now to build back better.
People's Republic of Mallacoota starts April 5 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
This week on News Breakfast, we'll keep you acquainted